This
2020
conference will now be recorded.
Policy Board meeting. Roll call. Ms. Burke.
Commissioner Justice,
Here.
Commissioner Owen, Commissioner Bearden, Ms. Weaver for Commissioner Jack Mariano.
Here.
Councilmember Montanari. Councilmember Hurtak. Councilmember Beckman. Here. District Director Boatright.
Here.
Governing Board Member Holton.
Here.
Mr. Tom McGill.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Before we get to the next item, I wanted to read a note to County Commissioner Michael Owen from Hillsborough County, unable to attend due to illness. So we wish him smooth recovery and appreciate the notification. We have new microphones in the building. You don't see the microphones at your desk. They're in the ceiling, in the floor, and the walls. They hear everything you say. They will pick up side conversations very clearly, so govern yourself accordingly. Item number 1, changes to the agenda. Mr. Sherwood.
There are 2 changes to the agenda. There's an updated agenda item 10 based on management board recommendations from last Friday's meeting, as well as a new agenda item 10.1 in relation to effective Senate Bill 64 on Tampa Bay and the City of Tampa requests for a policy board statement. Be happy to answer any questions you might have on those changes. Address those questions when those agenda items.
Any questions?
Do we need a motion?
Yeah. Motion to approve the changes to the agenda.
So moved, yeah.
We have a motion. We have a second. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show it passes unanimously. Item number 2, minutes from the May 19th. Are there questions, revisions, or is a motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show it passes unanimously. Item number 3, public hearing on the proposed program-wide budget. Mr. Sherwood.
Yeah, at your place or on the agenda item 3 in your packets is our notice of budget hearing that was duly noticed in the Tampa Bay Times last week and this week. It was also placed on our website. This notice reflects our fiscal year 2024 initial budget, which would start October 1st, 2023 and run to September 30th, 2024. For fiscal year 2024, we're projecting about $3.5 million in revenue and expenditures. On the revenue side, we're expecting $1.346 million in federal grants revenues, and that would include our 5 open work plans as well as an ongoing EPA trash-free waters grant that we have. Specialty license plate revenues are estimated about $103,000. That's about where we've been at the past several years. Our sales have been holding steady, so that's our projection for fiscal year 2024. Non-federal contracts and other grants that are brought into the program, including T-Birth projects, Bay Mini grants, and other ancillary grants that we're managing through fiscal year 2024. We're expecting $1.338 million in revenues. For partner in-kind match that matches our fiscal year 2024 work plan as well as previous work plan years, we're expecting $315,852 in in-kind match. And then the remaining balance of already collected revenues from for past ongoing projects is expected to be $488,764. In total, like I mentioned, we're expecting about $3,592,641 in projected revenues that would cover the expenditures for both our program operations as well as contractual services. And that's highlighted on the bottom table. Our action plan implementation references are basically organizational operations, staff, office, as well as our accounting, legal, and auditing services. We're projecting $1,262,347 in expenditures for our overall organizational costs. On top of that is about $2,014,442 in expected contracted scientific restoration and outreach projects. This would cover all other contracted services of the program to implement the CCM. As I mentioned, our program makes up any interlocal agreement differences with our federal appropriations with in-kind match. So those expenditures are reflected in our budget as well at the $115,852 level. Again, for the total anticipated expenditures are $3,592,641. That concludes the staff presentation on fiscal year 2024 budget. At this time, I think we ask for any citizen comments.
Do we have any citizen comments on this agenda item on the budget? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Any questions, comments from the board?
This budget will be further discussed under action item 6.
All right, have another opportunity at that point. Item number 4, general citizens' comments. Any comments for good of the order, not on a specific agenda item? If you have comments on a specific agenda item, we'll have opportunity when we get to that item. Seeing none. Moving on to our action items. Item number 5, quarterly financial. Mr. Sherwood.
Page 9 of the packets is our quarterly report for the third quarter of fiscal year 2023, which ran through June 30th, 2023. As I've been indicating in prior board meetings, we're expecting a lot of project expenses to come in towards the tail end of this fiscal year. So we are still about halfway in terms of both revenues and expenditures of what we anticipated going into this fiscal year 2023. Since this report has been generated, I just want to let you know we have had about $500,000 of project expenses that came in. So that'll be reflected in the final budget that will be brought to the board at the November meeting, and we'll be a little bit closer to our budgeted numbers. One highlight, just want to mention on the expense side, you're a little bit over in terms of our printing costs. This is in accordance with some additional printing that we didn't anticipate in fiscal year 2023. We also have some economic valuation studies that we helped RPC print out, and you're welcome to take. We'll be talking a little bit more about that at the executive director and staff reports, but we're expecting to be a little bit over in terms of our overall printing costs. When the final budget is developed and brought to the board in November, we're expecting to be under in several expense categories, so we have more than enough funds to cover those additional printing costs, which are at this time only about $300 over what we budgeted at mid-year. So as I mentioned, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you had on the overall quarter 3 revenues and expenditures of the program.
Questions, comments, or is there a motion to accept?
Motion to accept?
Second. We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Show it passes unanimously. All right. Item number 6, the actual program-wide budget. Mr. Sherwood.
So on page 11 of your packets is our proposed initial program-wide budget for fiscal year 2024. As I mentioned, we're expecting about $3.5 million in activity for the upcoming fiscal year, and that's slightly above what we projected for fiscal year 2023. I just wanted to mention that on the expense side, you see direct personnel, salary and fringe expenses at 10.7%. It's actually reflecting an increase, a mandatory increase to FRS contributions, as well as programming in a position to help out with admin work. So we're looking to bring at least a part-time position on in the new fiscal year. But also encapsulated in that is an up to 7% consideration for staff salary increases for this year. And this is commensurate with a lot of the member governments throughout the region. And this was in response to a lot of the comments we received last August, wanting to retain some of our hard performing staff. This will allow me flexibility on an individual performance evaluation basis to consider up to a 7% staff increase for each of our staff. Also wanted to mention that our travel, conference, and registration costs are a little bit higher than what we had in fiscal year 2023. Again, this is to allow a lot of our junior staff to participate in both regional and national meetings to get our science out there to a broader audience. This was, I think, a consideration of the board in prior years to ensure that we're retaining staff and allowing them to grow into the position. So I have a little bit higher travel costs programmed in fiscal year 2024, and that will allow at least one meeting for each of our staff to attend in the next fiscal year. It also programs in some travel for grants that we have in relation to collaborating with researchers in Iowa. So there are those costs programmed in as well. And then last but not least, just want to mention on the accounting and payroll services side, there's a fairly significant jump from our current fiscal year. And I mentioned this when we were deciding on a contract for our new accounting and financial service provider at the last board meeting. We'll have to program in some overlap with our current service provider to close out this fiscal year, the audit probably through the December, January timeframe. So there will be some overlap with our existing contractor and our new contractor moving into fiscal year 2024. So we had to program that into the budget, and that's going to be a little bit higher than what we've experienced in the past. But after this next fiscal year, we expect a reduction being consistent with the new contractor's agreement. So as I mentioned, overall, about $3.5 million in expenses. They're be covered by a mixture of funding that's coming into the program. The actual revenues that we're projected to collect in fiscal year 2024 is at $3.1 million. And as I mentioned during the presentation of our fiscal year 2024 budget during the public hearing, we've already collected revenues for some of those projects. So we'll be covering the remainder, $488,000 with revenues that we've already collected in prior fiscal years. So again, in total, about $3.5 million in revenue and expenditures that we're projecting for fiscal year 2024. Be happy to answer any questions you have on the initial program-wide budget. And also just to mention that we have opportunity every year to see what pace we're spending or collecting revenues. And we have an opportunity to amend this budget usually around the May timeframe after we've gone through about half the fiscal year.
Any questions at this time? Councilmember.
I just want to make a comment that I applaud you, Ed, on taking care of your staff and the salary increases, as well as allowing that expenses for going to conferences to bring younger staff, to expand their knowledge base and their contacts and all that. I mean, you need to take care of your scientists and your staff that work for you. So I do appreciate that. I mean, I think when people serve in the public sector, it's not as high paying as private, and we need to do all we can to retain them for that institutional knowledge to do the best we can do. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Further comments? Commissioner, Councilmember.
Thank you. Ed, can you talk a little bit about the volunteer services, the decrease in that category, and what sort of impact is that going to have on us?
Yeah, so we've been having some staff discussions. That is generally an expense related to our volunteer Give a Day events, as well as larger events that we hold that involve the community. And this is a category that we have to report to EPA on if we're expending on food-related costs or other giveaways to the community. So that reduction is just reflecting probably a desire to hold less frequent events, but larger events that are involving more people.
Yes, ma'am.
So maybe a follow-up to that, and I'm going to confess that I haven't been to the volunteer events with Tampa Bay Estuary Program Board. I apologize for that. A lot of times they're held in parts of the region that aren't really close to Clearwater. But, as an environmentalist, I'm not a big fan of handing out a bunch of free t-shirts and swag stuff. Is that part of your expenses when you have volunteer events, or is it just, food and beverages and taking care of the volunteers as they're there?
It depends on the event and how we're partnering. We actually have an event this weekend. We're partnering with Tampa Bay Watch Scallop Search. We were giving away t-shirts at that event, and we're helping support that. But typically, the volunteer activities we do, we're usually feeding them after they're doing the hard work. That's where our expenses are usually centered. We also supplement oftentimes plant expenses for planning projects of volunteer activity.
I know the commissioner would echo Kathleen's comments about taking care of the staff and the increases. And I know the commissioner, when he met with you prior to this meeting, was very supportive of that. So I just wanted to echo Kathleen's comment on staff and you always put a very thoughtful budget together. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Ed, can you talk a little bit about the variance in insurance? Obviously, insurance is going up for everyone. We're going to project it to stay on that kind of escalating course, or do you talk to the underwrite, the agents or the insurance brokers regarding?
Actually, I have some good news on that front. We actually got our policy renewal this week before we advertised the budget. And what I'm going to project and probably recommend in our mid-year budget amendment is a reduction in insurance costs. So it didn't go up as high as we were expecting. It only increased by 3.2%. So our insurance costs will be down $22,000 in fiscal year 2024.
Wow, fantastic. Who's your agent?
Go through Florida Municipal Insurance Trust.
Further questions? What was our hit on the increase on FRS? Do you know off the top of your head?
It varies between Maya and I, but it was like a 1% to 2% increase in the FRS, organizational FRS contributions.
And just FYI to the county, it's an $18 million hit this year, including the sheriff's and deputies, high risk, everybody. But yeah, 18 million that we're paying. Good for the employees, but we got to find a way to pay for it. Further questions, discussion, or is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Show it passes unanimously. Congratulations on that. Item number 7, legal services amendment. Mr. Sherwood.
Yeah, on page 12 of your packets is consideration for an extension of Don Kahn's legal services contract with the program through December 31st, 2024. Don has been gracious enough to extend his contract terms and conditions until the end of next year, if the board approves. So we're very happy to have Don continue to work with the program, and we know that he's considering retirement at some point, and he's indicated he'll let us know very much ahead of time if that's going to be the case at the end of next year.
Not next year.
We appreciate the long service and the institutional knowledge.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Anyone want to ask a legal question while we've got here?
On the spot.
Oh, you're on the clock.
Or is there a motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show it passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your service.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it. Item number 8, independent auditor, Mr. Sherwood.
Yeah, on page 13 of your packet is consideration for our auditing services for fiscal year 23 through 2027. This is in response to quotes that we received last year that were a significant increase in our auditing services. We actually asked for quotes last year for our fiscal year 2022 audit. This request for quotes was basically asking for numbers for that 5-year period from fiscal year 2023 through 2027. We advertised this over the July timeframe. We received 3 quotes. The low cost bid for these services was from Rivero Gadamer, and we were recommending moving forward with that auditing service consultant. They actually provided the auditing services for fiscal year 2022, and they also provided the lowest cost estimates over that 5-year period that we put out for bid. So my recommendation is to move forward with Rivero Gadamer for this current fiscal year 2023 audit and audits through 2027.
Are there questions, discussion? Or motion to approve?
So moved.
We have a motion, we have a second. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show it passes unanimously. Item number 9, bipartisan infrastructure law long-term plan amendment. Mr. Sherwood.
On page 14 of your packet is consideration for some amendments to the plan that we brought to the board back at the May board meetings. If you recall, in our fiscal year 2024 work plan, we also included this section describing our plan for how we would use the 5 years bipartisan infrastructure law funding that would come to the program of the 2022 to 2026 period. About $4.5 million in total over that 5-year period. There's about 12 projects that we initially identified in that long-term plan, and of which we had to provide to EPA by June 1st. So while we sought approval back in May, Since that time, we've actually had some additional partner discussions, and there's some slight modifications we're recommending to that long-term plan. First one is fairly minor, and it relates to a City of Clearwater project at Cooper's Point. We originally identified that project under the theme of restoring and implementing wastewater infrastructure improvements. Since developing that long-term plan back in May, we've had ongoing discussions with the City of Clearwater. They're actually not going to be considering the use of reclaimed water at that project, but they are still pursuing different restoration components at Cooper's Point that we would still want to consider supporting. So we're just recommending moving that project from the theme 2 restoration category into theme 1 and under the green infrastructure living shoreline design and permitting projects. So again, the same level of support, just identifying it under a different theme in that long-term plan. The second change that we're recommending to the board consider is a project that the City of Largo has presented to the program. They currently discharge treated wastewater to the Feather Sound Golf Course, which ultimately leads to Old Tampa Bay. They are pursuing a project that would remove that discharge and actually look at deep well disposal of some of their effluent. That project would result in a potential 19-ton total nitrogen load reduction to Old Tampa Bay under fully permitted conditions. Based on that large load reduction and the water quality issues and seagrass issues we're having in Old Tampa Bay, recommending support for that project based on that large immediate load reduction that would result. There are folks from the City of Largo that are happy to discuss the project a little bit more. They provided a letter to the program kind of describing what they're moving forward with at this point. But I'm recommending support at the level of $454,900 in the bill long-term plan. And we would request that money from EPA around the 2025 period. So not this year, but the next fourth year of the funding cycle of bill funds. So that basically rounds out what we're recommending for changes in that long-term plan. The next steps is basically applying for an amended agreement with the EPA come this October for the third year of funding in 2023. We're not recommending any changes to those projects that were already presented, and they include some tidal tributary restoration projects that were received in response to T-Birth, as well as the City of Tampa Living Shoreline and other restoration project in McKay Bay. So just want to mention that and be happy to answer any questions you might have on our proposal, or if the City of Largo would like to make any comments on the project they're seeking funding support for. Recommend we entertain that now too.
Okay. City of Largo, would you like to say a few words about the project?
Ms. Shelby Bookman from City of Largo.
Good morning, I'm the Director of Environmental Services for Largo. Yes, this project is very exciting for us. Right now, we produce about 12 million gallons a day on average of wastewater. About half is used for reclaim. We absolutely did explore more beneficial resources for the use of our water. Our reclaim system uses about half, so 6 million gallons a day, but of course, like everyone else, there's a dry season and a wet season, and it's very wet here in Florida. Right now, our reclaim system comes pretty close to running out of water during that dry season, so we did consider expanding the system, but the offset just doesn't work for us. We would only be discharging to Tampa Bay after this deep well is installed in the extreme situations of like a hurricane. We do hope that almost every single day is down the deep well with 100% of our flow. We looked at other options such as saltwater intrusion barriers, really tried to partner with Bel Air. I'm not sure if any of you are aware of their drinking water issues, but they are connecting to the county. So that was no longer a viable source. We did, let's see, what else did we do? We spoke with Tampa Bay Water, but they also did not need our water. We do not have our own drinking water system, so that was not an option for us either. So the deep well really turned into our only option for the elimination of surface water discharge. And I'm open for any questions.
Yes, yes, sir.
Applaud your efforts in doing that, especially with the deep well injections. I just wanted to clarify, have you had any permitting issues with Florida DEP on that? I know other governmental entities around the state have and have had some concerns, so just wanted to see how Largo is doing.
I think we're in the same boat as everyone else. I want to say February, did we apply?
We started extremely early and only took a long time. So we believe seeking this grant in 25 and soliciting the construction in fall of 25, we feel that lag will normalize itself out. So we have taken that into account.
And you guys will also be in compliance with Senate Bill 64 then?
With that timing involved, with the, fingers crossed, it keeps me up at night, but we believe we've got an early enough start on the permit application, early enough start on the design that we're solid for compliance and solid for obtaining a timely well construction permit.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Further questions? Yes, ma'am.
I had one. Ed, when you were giving a brief, we introduced this agenda item amendment. It says that the Largo project would result in a potential 19-ton reduction of nitrogen into Old Tampa Bay. Over what period of time?
On an annual basis, if under fully permitted conditions.
Annually? Wow.
19 tons sounds like a lot, right?
It does. To me, I mean, in perspective, it sounds like a lot. Right? Okay. Per year, right.
And one thing just to mention, I didn't do it in my intro to this item. We're proposing to support the City of Largo project in lieu of the Regional Private Sewer Lateral Rebate Program. Recognize that there's still incentive programs being developed throughout the region. So if there's a desire to develop that program through estuary program resources, we can program that into our upcoming fiscal year 2025 and or 2026 work plan budget. Just continue support on those programs.
Further questions for Largo? Thank you very much for being here. Further questions on the agenda item? Discussion? Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show it passes unanimously. All right, item number 10, Ms. Burke.
As you all know, we've spent quite a bit of time over the course of the past several years talking about the challenges facing Old Tampa Bay, and this request for proposals is one important step in the process to begin to better understand and chart the path forward for how to resolve some of the water quality challenges that have been occurring in that bay segment. This particular action, this request for proposals on the assimilative capacity or the amount of pollution that bay segment can handle and still achieve the ecosystem outcomes that we are striving for as a community, is something that has also been laid out in the reasonable assurance plan for Tampa Bay. And so this is something that we've committed to participating on as a region, also through the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium, the declaration of cooperation that many of your entities have already signed on to. And so thank you to those of you who have provided that. So this request for proposals was reviewed by our management conference, by the Technical Advisory Committee and the Nitrogen Management Consortium, and was released back in June. We were accepting proposals through August, and essentially we received one at the close of the request for proposal period, we received one proposal from Geosyntec. And so we had an evaluation committee that met prior to the management board meeting to discuss the merits of the proposal that was submitted. In the amended agenda item, the updated agenda item at your places, you can see that the individuals that participated on that evaluation committee include representatives from Hillsborough County, serving as the co-chair of the Nitrogen Management Consortium, Mr. Jeff Greenwell, representatives from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, representatives from the Southwest Florida Water Management District, Dr. Chris Anastasio, and Dr. Marcus Beck on behalf of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. So that committee met and discussed the proposal that we did receive from Geosyntec, and they had a robust discussion that was evaluating on criteria that were listed in that request for proposals. And they had two main findings that I want to summarize for you all today. The first was that they unanimously agreed that the project team that was assembled by Geosyntec was a highly qualified team to conduct this work. The scores were very high across the board for the project team qualifications. There was high confidence in the team that was assembled. However, the evaluation committee also unanimously found that there were several deficiencies in the project approach that was articulated in the proposal that was received. And they spent much of the meeting discussing some of those deficiencies and how we ought to proceed in the face of those deficiencies. Those are listed out in the bulleted items here on your agenda item. They include things like the proposal was very much focused on the existing management paradigm and it did not present new ideas or alternative paradigms in the face of rapid ecological shifts in the Old Tampa Bay segment, particularly related to seagrass extent and macroalgae. They did not consider whether an indicator other than chlorophyll A or algae in the water column is more appropriate for assessing ecosystem health. They didn't address the apparent disconnect between chlorophyll A and nitrogen loading and the conditions that we're seeing in Old Tampa Bay, or propose any alternative methods to re-examine the nitrogen management paradigm that we've been applying throughout Tampa Bay over the past several decades. And they didn't adequately consider potential alternative drivers of ecological change. These include factors like changing rainfall patterns, sea level rise, changing temperature patterns, hydrologic alterations, hydraulic alterations, and competition between different kinds of macroalgae and other kinds of species that are going on in that bay segment. So they had a really robust discussion around all of these items and talked about some different alternatives for how they ought to proceed based on the scoring that they provided and the conversation that they had as a team. It was important to note that the team also, part of this felt very high stakes for them, and they noted that the Tampa Bay Reasonable Assurance Plan is a model for the rest of the state and how we address these kinds of challenges. And we're not the only estuary that are facing these kinds of challenges. And so it's important that the work that we undertake in this Old Tampa Bay Assimilative Capacity Assessment is innovative, technically rigorous, and will basically be setting the bar for how others perhaps have to reassess their reasonable assurance plans or their TMDLs in other portions of the state too. So they really thought that it was important that we get this right. So based on all of that conversation, the ultimate findings that the committee presented to the management board was that we ought to reject the proposal from Geosyntec that was received and revise the request for proposals to highlight those deficiencies and those alternative criteria that they identified as most important to understanding the issues that are going on in Old Tampa Bay, then re-advertise the request for proposals based on those revisions that are out there. That recommendation is what was approved by the management board, and so is before you all today to reject, revise, and re-advertise the request for proposals. There's an additional component to those discussions, and I want to give the whole thing fair shake. So part of their concerns is that this is cutting edge science, frontier kind of work, and they thought it would be very important that in addition to the peer review panel that was included in the proposal, that we also assemble an independent stakeholder subject matter expert like peer review process. And so you'll see in your agenda item, there's also a recommendation that any process that we embark on going forward includes sufficient funding to support an independent subject matter expert peer review process. So they felt very strongly about that being something that we include as an action. We had a very long discussion about whether or not, given the high confidence that all of the reviewers found in the team that was assembled in the proposal, whether or not it would be more appropriate to renegotiate and negotiate a different scope of work that specifically addresses the deficiencies that were identified in the review process. We know that this work is like I said, cutting edge, very technically challenging. We know that some of the best in the business are the ones that have proposed. And so there were a number of considerations or concerns that the evaluation committee discussed in light of those kinds of considerations. Ultimately, there was conditional support for that kind of approach, should that have been the direction that the management board wanted to provide to you all. And so that was presented as an alternative action to the management board, but that's not the way that does not reflect the final findings of the review committee, nor does it reflect the final action of the management conference. But I did want you all to know that alternative action was discussed by both the evaluation committee and the management board at their meeting last Friday. Finally, we did have a meeting with the consultant team that did propose with Geosyntec and some of the leadership team from their proposal to discuss some of these issues and the path forward. And they are here today to provide comment or answer any questions that you might have about their proposal. So it's very complex, and thank you for hearing me out through all of those steps. I will draw your attention back to the top of the handout at your table. The recommended action from the management board is that you all direct staff to revise and re-advertise the request for proposals for the Old Tampa Bay Assimilative Capacity Project to address the deficiencies identified by the evaluation committee, and then to recommend that you direct staff to solicit additional subject matter expert peer reviewers at a cost of up to $25,000, which is within the executive director's authority, to ensure that all of the work products throughout the assimilative capacity project for the Old Tampa Bay segment are appropriate and necessary to address the challenges that Bay segment is experiencing. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll remind you that we have the project team here.
Very good questions for Ms. Burke before we hear. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just kind of shocked we only got one back. So that's kind of disappointing. When we review this, is there going to be that consideration, or how are we going to approach getting a wider?
So this was a sentiment that was also expressed at the management board meeting, and what we've discussed is different strategies to advertise even more aggressively the request for proposals. We've talked about doing things like hosting an additional question and answer meeting with potential respondents in advance. So there's a number of steps of things that we can do to address that concern, because it's shared by the management board as well as staff in the evaluation committee. This was another topic of discussion. It's not the only time that this has happened to us. It's very, the work that we do is somewhat niche. And I think many times consultants understand that. They consider proposals and they decide whether or not it's better to collaborate rather than compete. And I think we see that reflected in many of the results of our request for proposals, but it continues to be a concern that we hear as staff from both the management board and the policy board, and have some ideas about how we can advertise more aggressively if we re-advertise.
Great. What's your time frame now? Looking outward, now that you've going to massage this a bit,
Sure.
what do you think the time frame is?
It's our hope that we can turn the revised scope of work and a new request for proposals around relatively quickly and get the request for proposals advertised in early September. And then we think maybe another month or two in accepting those proposals, another quick review process, and then have it back before you all at your November board meeting.
Very good, thank you.
Further questions? Yes, sir.
Chair, and thank you so much for that, Maya, and I wholly agree with the recommendation by the management committee. I'd like to ask some of the consultants too, if they kind of had their wish list, what kind of scope would you envision to really do a great job?
Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Scott Ditch. I'm a senior principal with Geosyntec. I'm the project director for the proposal team.
And I'm Tony Janicki with Janicki Environmental, and we're part of that team to support Geosyntec program.
And I'll just start with a general comment is that, we put a really strong team together of some of the most experienced professionals in the Tampa Bay region to take both a historic and fresh look at this. And we welcome the opportunity through whether further interview or scope negotiation to refine our approach and scope here. And the DBS program, what we're all looking for is a chance to take a look at Old Tampa Bay and see what's going on. And to your point, I think these are items in here which are takeoffs of the approach that we already put forward. So we'd be willing to sit down and talk with the SRA program and others, whether the management board, to refine that approach even further, in lieu of going back out and making that time to read it.
Yeah, with respect to the one proposal, I think what we're finding is that's more the norm. And for a variety of reasons, and not the least of which is that there's a lot of people that are really busy doing all kinds of other projects. And most recently, we were faced with the same issue in Sarasota County to develop a watershed management plan. Ours was the only proposal, but they did, they went through an interview process so that they could ask the question. And we could address those in developing the scope of work, which is going to save them a great deal of time and quite honestly, staff effort as well. So for what it's worth, this is an unusual situation.
Further questions? Yes, sir.
Question along the second part of the action recommended that the peer review. Mike, can you explain to us $25,000, how much, what does that get us? And how many people, give us a little context.
Just that in prior large projects involved in the program, like the old Tampa Bay integrated ecosystem model, we also employed that tactic to bring on subject matter experts and usually paid for their time to travel and comment on any of the products developed by the contracting teams. So we're looking at probably funding 2 to 3 subject matter experts under that $25,000 range. And we'll solicit proposals for those services in tandem with any new request for proposals that might be asked.
And are you looking for, I take it you're looking for people nationwide because we have, seems to me, a bunch of subject matter experts right here.
We would look both locally as well as nationally. The team that was assembled by Geosyntec was a combination of both local and outside expertise as well. The review committee as well as the management board thought it was a good idea to have an independent review panel as well through the SRA program.
And further, the evaluation committee felt that an independent peer review process could also be a way to infuse more emphasis and expertise on some of these new, more cutting edge paradigms. So there's a lot of strength locally in terms of understanding the existing management paradigms and methods for addressing some of these kinds of challenges, but they were very interested in being able to use a peer review process to reflect some of that, some newer ideas in terms of the kinds of science and challenges that are facing Old Tampa Bay. So yes, we would put out a request for qualifications nationally.
Yes, ma'am.
So to follow up on Commissioner Montanari's comment about that travel, well, what the $25,000 is really for. So people are going to get reports and they'll review them and spend their time doing that and then fly in for some kind of, discussion of that. So travel and lodging and that. But if we have, it could be less. I mean, if we have locals,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah, and we would encourage interactions with our technical advisory committee as well as nitrogen management consortium as products are developed by the contractor.
And then, so I share a concern, more ignorance about one proposal being received from Geosyntec, which is fine. I bet that discussion was pretty fascinating. Like, how long did it take? 2 or 3 hours? The discussion, about the proposal that came in?
Well, it was just the one proposal, so I think the conversation was more like an hour and a half.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess I want to say too, that the team that it's not just Geosyntec, they assembled a team. You have Janicki Environmental, you have Wildwood Consulting, and then you had, they also included other experts from other firms around the area too. So, you know, they've assembled multiple
Yeah.
firms within there. But yeah, it was about an hour and a half of discussion.
Okay. So I think, you know, the bullets here about the things that we are looking for, or that Tampa Bay Estuary Program Board is looking for in this work are important. And so the question is essentially, we send out another RFP and advertise a little more heavily to try to get more bids. Or we shape the proposal with Geosyntec right now. But I mean, it doesn't sound like there's a great big time differential. You know, you're going to have this to us by November regardless, right?
That's our goal.
Pretty much. Okay, so I would say to Geosyntec, you know, does that seem reasonable to take the feedback and then just go and revise your proposal? I mean, probably chances are you might be the only ones who respond again. You just shape your response a little differently.
That's what we would do if that situation would occur.
And that's all doable, right? Those bullets are all doable?
Yeah, one of the things that in putting together this team, working with Geosyntec, you know, I've been working with the program since 1991, and my firm has been for the last 24 years, quite honestly. So what we were bringing was the ability to be able to use all of the information that we have in-house already to apply to that project with a new set of eyes to look at the paradigm, for example. So, you know, we can hit the ground running because of the history that we have with the program. But at the same time, we're offering the program, again, that new set of eyes. And so that, just to let you know, that was kind of our strategy in developing this team.
And I think when you put an RFP out, the more detail you can put about what you're really expecting and looking for, right?
Councilmember?
You know, the way I'm looking at this, I agree with what the management board is recommending and the actions that are. I think that is a reasonable way to go, and I do like the peer review aspect of this. I think that's very.
I would agree with that. I agree with your recommendation. Geosyntec's going to actually, they've been at the table once. They're going to have an advantage anyway at this point because they've got skin in the game. So, but I agree with your recommendation to go back out and just take another look at it. You want to get exactly what you want out of this, and don't sell yourself short.
Mr. Holden?
Chair, one follow-up question too, and again, I agree with what has been said here. And I'll ask Maya and the consultants for an honest opinion too. In terms of the budgeted amount we have for this project, how does it compare to similar projects done around the state? Is it under, is it more, is it about on the mark, or what is the honest dollar number here? Because, you know, obviously you guys are in the business to make money. I want to see if it's relatively low or high compared to very comparable assessments.
I can speak, I think, more effectively in relation to the scale of the kind of projects that we usually let as an estuary program. And we typically are working in very small dollar amounts, and we understand we're trying to, you know, squeeze as much as we can out of every nickel. And so I'm quite sure there's a lot of folks that are responding to proposals with us because they want to do the work, not necessarily because it is, you know, going to be the moneymaker for their individual firms, and we acknowledge and respect that. That said, I will say for us, for a research project like this, this is a larger scale amount for what we typically make available. And we did that conscientiously because we wanted this to be a competitive process, and we wanted to solicit the best firms that we could. So it's probably a bit of both. It's a lot for us, but probably not a lot statewide.
maybe we can hear from these guys in terms of their experience statewide, because I think we need an honest assessment of these dollars really thin to do the kind of work that you've been asked to do, and especially with a revised scope.
This project is in support of the reasonable insurance plan for Tampa Bay.
Right.
We're working on 3 other reasonable insurance plans that are on the state right now.
That's what I'm.
And as a piece of those other projects, this budget is reasonable. And we feel very comfortable that we could, in fact, we did not propose the full budgeted amount for the project. We were actually less than that. Recognizing because of the history that we have and the ability of us to hit the ground running, that we can save the program money.
Interesting discussion. So you bring up a really interesting point. This being a nonprofit, is there room for somebody to come in and bid and then also do some in-kind work on top of that? Is there a way to balance that benefits them and us at the same time? Is there ever a way to balance that so that I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. If
But certainly, as a special district, we always, as Maya mentioned, try to squeeze as much juice out of the fruit as we can.
Mhm.
So we're trying to save taxpayer funds to get this work accomplished. And any proposals that are brought in that have in-kind or match associated with it, we consider that as a bonus to the work that's being proposed. So yeah, we would welcome any sort of proposals along those lines. But we do have up to a not to exceed amount that we also advertise there.
I mean, it's always good to have a tax write-off. I don't know. I've never seen one form that way, but when you all went down this road, it just popped into my head. So sorry.
Thank you for the input. Further questions? Scott, do you have anything else you wanted to share?
No, just thank you very much for the opportunity to come up here and speak.
We appreciate you being here this morning. Appreciate your involvement. Are there further questions, or is there a motion to approve the staff recommendation and management board recommendation, or is there other motions?
I'll go ahead and make a motion. I just want to ask legal, do we need 2 motions or can we just?
It would be best if you separate the 2 items, 2 motions.
Well, I'll go ahead and move approval of agenda item 10A as amended.
We have a motion?
Second.
Second. Further discussion on 10A? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show that passes unanimously.
No, I'll move agenda item 10B.
Second that one.
We have a motion second. Further discussion, 10B. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show it passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being, we appreciate your partnership. 10.1.
Yeah, this is a new agenda item and it comes on the heels of discussion from the management board. We received a request from the city of Tampa to place an item on our management board agenda that would consider a statement from the ESHO program in support of ongoing projects that would reduce nitrogen loads to Hillsborough Bay and Tampa Bay in general. So we had a fairly robust discussion at the management board meeting. We also received some public comment on this issue. But really, at the crux of this is sort of the difficulty of some of our municipalities in meeting the tenets of Senate Bill 64 and some of the projects that are considering beneficial reuse throughout the region. I know there's a fairly robust discussion around some of the facilities at the city of Tampa. And again, all the city was looking for was some sort of support in terms of our continued nutrient load reduction paradigms. This was discussed on the Old Tampa Bay project, but also within our comprehensive management plan. There are 2 specific actions that this request would fall under, WQ1 and WW1. Both speak to, again, trying to work towards reducing nutrient loads, no matter the source, to all bay segments. And that's oftentimes through the work of the Nitrogen Management Consortium and partners throughout the region. And one of the ways to accomplish that is to further look at and evaluate ways to beneficially use reclaimed water. And that relates to action WW1. So again, I think the city's request was just asking for us to reiterate sort of the stances that were developed in that 2017 CCMP update. One other item to think about is the new declaration of cooperation that the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium participants are now signing on to. And this was to develop a new reasonable assurance plan by 2027 in a collaborative fashion that will take into consideration some of these new challenges we're facing, particularly in the upper bay segments. So all those sort of actions that we're now working on sort of highlight this need to take more of a comprehensive look at all sources, all nitrogen load sources discharging into Tampa Bay and what we could do as effectively as a community to address those nitrogen loads. Again, with the benefit of trying to improve water quality to regain those seagrasses that we lost in the 2016 time period. So a lot of important work, a lot of discussions around what is the type of projects and the suite of projects that are going to be necessary to get us back on track. But again, I think the city's request is in line with what we've already developed in our major management plan and guidance documents that our partners have signed on to. And a reiteration of that was recommended by the management board. Be happy to answer any additional questions on that item if you'd like.
Questions, discussion? Really, the question was what the reiteration, what format that would look, whether we're going to put you out in the town hall and read a statement, or we can write a letter from the board or from staff, or.
Yeah, they didn't make a specific recommendation, but the board could consider a letter from either me as executive director or the chair, or in combination, the chair and the executive director, just reiterating the stance of those actions and strategies identified in the CCMP. Be happy to generate that.
Mr. Chair, I do think we have a member of the public who wants to speak to this item.
Okay. Any other questions or comments before we go to public comment? All right, public comment on this item?
Mr. Flannery?
Well, good afternoon. My name is Sid Flannery, and what I'll be speaking today is related to nitrogen load reduction, how the city of Tampa, and I'm not speaking for the city of Tampa, I'm a member of the stakeholders group, how the city of Tampa give them more flexibility, how to meet Senate Bill 64, and also, but I want to say our citizens group supports the Estuaries program, outstanding work on pursuing nitrogen load reduction. We reiterate our support for your overall goal of nitrogen load reduction. We also support the wonderful work that the Estuary program has done, encouraging beneficial reclaimed water projects. So what I'm going to be presenting today does not contradict those goals in any sort of way, but what we will be talking about, our recommendations for improved application of Senate Bill 64 to Tampa's treated domestic wastewater discharges to Tampa Bay, and it's prepared by a citizen stakeholders group. First, let me tell you, I'm a retired chief environmental scientist with the Southwest Florida Water Management District. I worked on freshwater flow to estuaries for nearly 30 years and water use permits for the city of Tampa and Tampa Bay Water, and also Florida Power and Light. Our citizen stakeholders group back in December of 2022, yes, for 20 maybe, the city of Tampa formed a citizen stakeholders group to where they could discuss with the citizens their plans for reclaimed water use and how to meet the requirements of Senate Bill 64. So it was actually December 2020. We met over a dozen times with city staff, and we are actually meeting with city staff while Senate Bill 64 was being introduced into the legislature and being considered. So we really discussed how the city could go about meeting that, and what are the pluses and minuses and difficulties. And today I'm representing that group. Again, in 2021, Senate Bill 64 was passed by the Florida legislature. It requires the elimination of non-beneficial surface water discharges effluents, for instance, domestic wastewater, such as the city of Tampa's wastewater. It encourages reclaimed water use and really encourages potable water supply, but that is not required. Generally, they want to have a surface water discharge limit and put it to beneficial use. Well, the current interpretation of Senate Bill 64 will require the city of Tampa to eliminate and reroute 50 million gallons of discharge from their advanced wastewater treatment plant on Seddon Channel by January 1st, 2032. That's 8.5 years. What I'm going to be talking about today is that because the city of Tampa, I didn't see my advance here.
I know, it's advancing in the
Yeah.
virtual, but not here.
I think Senate Bill 64, if you're a small utility in Central Florida that provides 5 MGD of potable water and you're using a groundwater to do that and you're disposing to a lake or river, this makes more sense, particularly where the Florida aquifer is under stress. The fact that the city of Tampa uses a river water supply is a whole nother ballgame, and I think presents a series of challenges that we're going to discuss. As you know, the city of Tampa gets the vast majority of its water supplies from the Hillsborough River. The river has been impounded approximately 10 miles upstream from the river mouth for over 100 years. The city of Tampa has received their water supply for the Hillsborough River that long. What is not shown on this graphic is the Tampa Bypass Canal, which is off to the right. It was dug in the channel of 6 Mile Creek in the Palm River in the 1970s and 1980s, and there's a lateral canal that connects the TBC to the Hillsborough River Reservoir. Since the mid-1980s, the city has augmented water supplies in the Tampa Bypass Canal since that time. Also in 2002, Tampa Bay Water began withdrawing water from the Hillsborough River and the Tampa Bypass Canal. So the combined use from these two water bodies now is about 125 million gallons per day. It's roughly doubled since about the mid-1990s. Oh. Maya,
Yes?
I think we got the wrong PowerPoint presentation for me.
Oh.
Mine was for the policy board. This is last week's. Yeah.
I have it queued up. If
Yeah, can you just take
Yeah.
control and
Yeah.
advance slides for him?
just a second. Sid.
Again, to reiterate my principal point, I think that the city uses a river for water supply, puts a whole new spin on how to meet Senate Bill 64, because there's so much variation in flow in the Hillsborough River that really affects things. So we'll be talking about that. Okay, yeah, go back one slide, please. Yeah, this is the one we're seeing. I think we're on the right one now. Again, the city has been using the river for a long time, as does Tampa Bay Water. And the red star at the bottom, that's the location of the Howard F. Curran Advanced Wastewater Treatment Plant. It's about 2.5 miles directly downstream of the mouth of the Hillsborough River. In recent years, it has averaged about 54 million gallons per day of discharge. Again, total water use from the Hillsborough River and Tampa Bypass Canal is about 125. Now, not all of that water would have flowed to Tampa Bay, but Howard F. Curran does replace a portion of the water that's taken from the Hillsborough River and TBC for water supply. It's returning flow to Tampa Bay.
It's me, Sid. You on advance? Just tell me when they
Just tell Ed that
Okay, yeah,
he's
thank you.
controlling for you.
I will, thank you. Thank you, Ed. The city has stated there are 3 primary goals for reclaimed water projects using their AWT discharge. One is drought-proof the reservoir. During dry years, they could begin to supplement the reservoir if they're worried about running out of water supply. The other is to provide minimum flows to the lower Hillsborough River. The lower minimum flows are now being met with existing sources, but if they're being to increase, reclaimed water could be used for that reason. And thirdly, to meet the requirements of Senate Bill 64, by eliminating or rerouting 50 MGD of highly treated wastewater from their AWT plant. Next. What I'm going to show you is the real crux of the issue here. Flow in the Hillsborough River varies tremendously seasonally and from year to year. It's not unusual from one year to the next for the average flow to double or decrease by that amount. The need for reclaimed water for these 2 primary purposes will vary tremendously between years. What we have is a bar graph of no flow days at the Hillsborough River Dam. When there is flow at the dam, the city can completely meet their water supply with withdrawals from the Hillsborough River. So there is no need for reclaimed water to supplement the reservoir. Secondly, when there's flow at the dam, there's no need for minimum flows. So you can see that no flow days at the dam varies tremendously from year to year. Over 250 days from 1999 to 2001, but less than 50 days in some years and less than 100 days. So what I want to do is this tremendous variation makes an amazing variation in how much reclaimed water is needed for these two purposes. Next. I want to show you these 3 successive years here fairly recently as an example, 2014 to 2015 and 16. There was flow over the dam, you can see quite a lot during these days. The no flow days were very low. So the big question becomes, Senate Bill 64 is requiring the city of Tampa to reroute 50 million gallons per day, pretty much on average, pretty much all year. The question becomes, where are you going to put that water? That's a very legitimate concern, which we came up quite quickly. Now, the city, a couple of years ago, was considering very large aquifer storage recovery process in which pipelines would be built up to the central part of Tampa, a very large process indeed. They currently do aquifer storage recovery at a rate of about 10 million gallons per day using river water. But what I want to emphasize here, anytime we reroute wastewater for other purposes and put it in other locations, like a potable supply reservoir or the Florida aquifer, it's going to require additional treatment from what goes into Tampa Bay. We have to be very careful with that. I want to give you an example. Many of you have probably heard about PFAS compounds in the news, forever chemicals. Well, the EPA has recommended some maximum contaminant levels are pretty stringent, 4 parts per trillion. The good news is the water in the city of Hillsborough River and the city of Tampa's current finished water is close to that standard. They're looking pretty good in that regard. The other news is 2 PFAS compounds that are in the wastewater are well above the EPA standards. For one of the compounds, it's over 4 times higher than what's in the river water. For the other compound, it's over 6 times higher than what's in the river water. Now, apparently there are processes you could do to reduce those compounds, but these processes would be expensive and costly and time consuming. In general, when you look out west, wherever, the processes needed to make potable water safe for direct or indirect potable reuse are pretty expensive. The key point of this is you really only want to do it in quantities that you need to. And we feel that Senate Bill 64 is requiring the city of Tampa to reroute very large quantities of advanced wastewater treatment without considerations of cost and safety, not adequately. So, next slide, please. Our citizens group made this recommendation about a year ago, that the quantity of discharge from the city's AWD plant that is eliminated and rerouted be allowed to vary on a seasonal and yearly basis. Yearly variances to average quantities should be allowed. In other words, the quantity of reclaimed water they need in a dry year will be very different than a wet year, and they'd be allowed to do that rather than having to reroute 50 MGD all the time. Interestingly, I submitted this idea, this is hearsay, don't repeat me on this, to a division director at DEP up in Tallahassee in 2001. We had a couple of phone conversations, and they didn't see any real problem with this. Tailor making your water management to hydrologic conditions, this is like water management 101. And given the fact that the city of Tampa uses the river for water supply, we think there could be very large variances to an estimated average that they would come up with. Next, please. Our second recommendation is the city not be required to eliminate an average of 50 MGD of its AWT plant by 2032. Lower averages can be determined based on yearly needs assessments, looking at the actual need for reclaimed water. Now, it's interesting, the statute allows for discharges to continue if they have a beneficial ecological effect. It is very narrowly defined in the statute, but it can be applied, but this could be determined for Tampa Bay. And what I mean by that, keep in mind, Tampa Bay is an estuary. It's where there's a mixture of fresh water and salt water. And the freshwater flow is very important to the biological productivity of the estuary. And when the city changed to advanced wastewater treatment, it really improved the quality of Hillsborough Bay. And in the summer of 2022, the director of the City of Tampa Water Department asked, well, are there any benefits of our discharge to Tampa Bay? I volunteered to write a report, and I wrote a 20-page report. I submitted the first draft to the City of Tampa. They reviewed it, and I accepted their changes, and it went along fine. I would have to say also that Tony Janicki, who was just here at Janicki Environmental, wrote a critique of my report and submitted it to the Tampa as well. In November of 2022, the Water Department, City of Tampa, submitted my report to the DEP office in Temple Terrace. And it said, the Water Department's not taking a position, but can DEP take a recognition? Are there benefits of our discharge to Tampa Bay? DEP replied back very quickly, no. The next day, the City of Tampa asked, well, can you tell us why not? Interestingly, the reply from DEP was one short email, and it was purely sort of bureaucratic reasons. It was not a technical assessment. They did not look at the technical information. They said, based on a reading of Senate Bill 64, benefits are determined and water bodies that have minimum flows and levels, where the City of Tampa discharges to a marine location which is not covered by a minimum flow. So it does not qualify. It was a very narrow reading of Senate Bill 64. So our citizens have concluded that DEP needs flexibility to look at water bodies, particularly economically valuable estuaries that don't have minimum flows established. I worked on minimum flows levels for 30 years. I can tell you the fact that this discharge is 2.5 miles downstream of the mouth of the Hillsborough River does not negate its importance. So we think that needs to be looked at. Now, we can have long technical seminars about the role of freshwater flow to Tampa Bay and the relative role of discharge. We don't want to do that now. But I think what it does, it's ecologically valid, and it would allow the city to have much greater flexibility. And we want to emphasize, we think the role of nutrient loading and the city's discharge needs very thorough assessment. And it can be done looking at its relative effect, freshwater flow budgets, and the whole 9 yards. What I really want to emphasize strongly too, if the ecological function of this discharge is recognized, that does not mean it all has to stay in place. I think hypothetically, we could say, let's say the City of Tampa concludes, again hypothetically, they could use 30 MGD of reclaimed water in a dry year and 15 in a wet year. That could be simulated on its effects, and it's very likely that it would be okay to take that water from Tampa Bay. The flip side of that coin is equally important. We could well prove out that if the remaining water stayed, that would be okay. Again, this is a complex ecological thing. I think it's very valid, but we think it needs to be looked at in a technical sense rather than just a very narrow reading of Senate Bill 64. Next, please. And here's an important caveat I really want to emphasize to the estuary program. Apart from the need for reclaimed water projects, if technical assessments indicate that nutrient load reductions in the city's AWT plant are needed to improve the ecological characteristics of Tampa Bay, that can be pursued by other methods, such as deep well injection or additional treatment of the city's discharge in order to reduce nutrients. Again, let's say it just doesn't work out for the City of Tampa to reduce discharges as much as we would like. Independent of that, the estuary program for regional governments could recommend nutrient load reductions, which could be achieved by deep well injection, which we've heard a bit about today, or additional treatment of the discharges of the city's discharge to reduce nutrients. So our proposals do not negate strategies to otherwise reduce nutrient load reductions or to reduce nutrient loads. Next, please. The overall goal of our recommendations for clarifications and improved regulatory procedures for applications of Senate Bill 64 is as follows. It gives the City of Tampa the operational flexibility to evaluate and implement reclaimed water projects in quantities that are truly needed, cost-effective, safe, and protective of the region's water and natural resources. Again, we call for very thorough analyses of the effects of this on the Bay. I think this is much better than this one-size-fits-all approach out of Tallahassee that they have to reroute 50 MGD of wastewater. Next, please. Again, I want to emphasize our proposal does not preclude the pursuit of reclaimed water projects or nutrient load reduction strategies for Tampa Bay. What we suggest is on a yearly basis, the city will evaluate and submit plans to FDEP for reclaimed water projects that may reroute some AWT discharge. Quantities increase over time as new beneficial uses for reclaimed water are identified. Each plan will also include an assessment of that plan on the water quality and ecological characteristics of Tampa Bay. And I reiterate again, I'm repeating, apart from reclaimed water projects, if needed, nutrient load reduction strategies can be pursued to benefit the Bay using other methods such as deep well injection or additional water quality treatment of the surface discharges. Next, please. This is my final slide. We have prepared a technical document describing the plan that we propose, which we will want to submit to Florida DEP. We will present it to city staff and city council at a workshop in August. So this month, we will be sitting with both to the city, to the staff and council. And then in September, after they have seen it, we will distribute it for regional review to the estuary program, to Tampa Bay Water, to various parties for review and comment. And I think, possibly this could be good for regional application, but the emphasis right now is on the city of Tampa's discharge because they are really in sort of a dilemma. And I think protection of our water resources are in a dilemma with this call to, regardless of the situation, route 50 MGD of water. So again, I really want to endorse the estuary program's emphasis on reducing nitrogen loading and encouraging beneficial research reuse projects, but let's keep an open mind on how Senate Bill 64 could be adjusted to better protect Tampa Bay and come up with projects in the best public interest. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Flannery. We appreciate you and the citizen group and all the time and energy that you put into the topic. We appreciate it. Sorry that we don't have our Tampa representatives here today in attendance to kind of give some of the feedback. But any questions or comments from the board?
I would say that was really informative. I like how you laid out the issues and the solutions. I would say that on your overall goal slide, you put the city of Tampa would be responsible, but I would build it more as a partnership with FDEP so that you're approaching it in a way that you're gonna work together to set those goals and those resources. So that was the only thing that struck me was bringing FDEP to the table with that more.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And again, after we submit it for local review, we're sending it to FDEP.
Right, I know.
It's their ultimate call.
Yes, it is,
And
but
I think Senate Bill 64 has got some narrow aspects to it where FDEP had more flexibility to apply this. So that's exactly right. But whether they choose to apply it statewide or regionally, it's where the city of Tampa is our biggest concern right now. But it's ultimately FDEP's call.
I agree. And things aren't black and white. It's easy to write those laws up in Tallahassee, and sometimes they don't understand the different nuances that are well taken with your points. Thank you.
You could have ended with sometimes they just don't understand.
Great presentation, by the way. Thank you. You do a credit to Swift Mud and happy for your service. Quick question. Have you and your group or any of the other folks from Tampa entered into discussions on amendments to Senate Bill 64, House or Senate leadership? Where's the status of that?
Very good question. In our technical document, we're going to have 3 appendices. And we actually drafted legislation which could be added to Senate Bill 64 at the end of 2022. And I called the offices of 4 or 5 different legislators. Some showed some interest, but it didn't go anywhere. The legislature's concerned about all sorts of things these days. But yeah, Appendix A in our technical document will have actually statute language that we suggested. It's very simple. And it allows for yearly variances, for example. And it says you can recognize benefits of flows, the water bodies up. And so that'll be an appendix. Yes, we did pursue that.
Who was the original bill sponsor? Did you go to them?
Yeah, we tried to, got to their assistant.
Got to their assistant.
Yes.
Who was the original bill sponsor? Does anybody know of that? Who crafted that?
A couple years ago now.
I've forgotten at this time.
No, I was just curious to see if they were still there or, there was a way for you to.
We got some real interest in, I would like to compliment new Representative Karen Gonzalez Pittman. She took an interest in this, but nothing got interested in the committees. And we talked to these legislators, a handful of them, while the committees were in session. But people tell us, boy, you need to get like a real big lead time on this sort of thing, But at one of these workshops that the city put on, a very knowledgeable local fellow who's on the NYCHA consortium says, the legislative approach might be tough. Instead, you can work with the Florida Administrative Code, work with DEP's procedures, which may not require going through the legislature. And we think there's room to do that here. We think our proposals make sense.
Thank you, Mr. Flannery.
It's Albritton. So he's like the Northeast, right? Albritton. I'm trying to remember.
Mr. Sherwood had a comment.
Central Park.
I'm sorry, council member?
Yeah, I just had, since we have all of our scientists here who are looking out for our estuary, do you have any reflection or comment on that presentation?
I I can make a comment.
That'd be great.
Again, respect Sid's proposal, and I don't think it disagrees with any of the tenets that have been proposed to the estuary programs management. As an estuary program, we have never been prescriptive about how individual entities would meet either state legislation or their own individual responsibility as defined through nitrogen load allocations throughout the Tampa Bay region. So from that point of view, I think we have been flexible as well in terms of what we're recommending in terms of nitrogen load reduction projects that are pursued by our different partners. And as they come up and we actually see a clear picture of what's being proposed, I think, we take a case by case basis. I think there's a lot of tenets that we agree with in terms of the beneficial reuse of some of that water, making sure it's treated so that there aren't effects to the groundwater system and or the environment where it might be discharged or relocated to. So all those comments are reflective, I think, within the management plan and are, what would be reiterated in a letter that was requested by the city of Tampa. And again, I think from the program's perspective, we have never been perspective on telling what entities what they should do. We've asked for this collective effort to reduce nutrient loads, no matter the source, throughout Tampa Bay. And we're agnostic to the approaches that are taken by each individual partner to get there.
Thank you, sir. Other comments or questions? Is there a motion to approve the restatement of the reiteration of our existing TBEP Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan goals? And then we'll have the executive director craft a letter, statements to that degree.
I'll move that, and I would love for your name to be on the letter too, Chair.
All right, then I would add that we'll have the staff craft a letter and then Mr. Short and I will approve the final draft. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. All right. Item number 11, Executive Director Staff Reports. Take us away.
Yeah, a couple of updates from my end. I just wanted to welcome Ms. Harley Jones to the program as our new science communication coordinator. She started at the very last day in July, so has been with us probably, was it almost 3 weeks now? So we're looking forward to her contributions to the program. She comes by way of the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, where she worked as a public information officer. So welcome, Carly.
Welcome. Glad you're here.
Working with you guys.
On the bottom part of the report on page 16, I just wanted to bring to the board's attention, and this was heard at an earlier meeting of the Regional Planning Council's Natural Resource and Impact Review Committee on Wednesday. The Army Corps Engineer has proposed some harbor dredging projects, and there are significant beneficial reuse, beneficial dredge disposal use projects in light of that dredging. I think they estimated somewhere in the order of 22.5 million cubic yards of material through the collective actions of deepening the channel, extending some of the channels to accommodate bigger ships into the harbor. Along with that is the disposal of that material, and they identified several projects that would expand on islands and increase ports and also accommodate a new boat ramp along the Skyway, as well as disposal of some of the hardened materials to create hard bottom habitat. So that was discussed at the ABM meeting. The board is looking for comments on that draft general report by September 11th. And we've been involved, and the Corps sits on our management board in terms of guiding some of those recommended beneficial use projects. But at this point, I would encourage all your staff to take a look at it and submit comments to the Corps as you deem appropriate by that September 11th date. Other than that, I wanted to also turn it over to staff to give some highlights on some upcoming projects. Sheila, you want to go first?
Sure. So I just want to make you all aware of several events that are coming up. The first is the Great Bay Scallop Search, which is this weekend. So Ed kind of mentioned this earlier, but this is an annual event It's hosted by Tampa Bay Watch, and this year we are partnering with them to expand it. So the Great Bay Scallop Search is a citizen science or participatory science project where volunteers go out and look in the seagrass meadows and assess or quantify the amount of scallops that they find. So this is really how we get our scallop population numbers each year. So this year we're partnering with Tampa Bay Watch to expand the reach of this program so that we can get a better assessment of our scallop population in Tampa Bay. So again, that is this weekend. Our second location will be at Grandview Park. So if you want to come say hi, feel free to stop by. The other thing that's going on, it's National Estuaries Week from September 16th through the 23rd. So this is a week-long celebration where we get to basically celebrate all the amazing resources that Tampa Bay and the other estuaries around the country provide to us. So we have a few events that are going on. The first is on September 16th. We are doing an info paddle. So this is really just an opportunity to get people out on the water in Boca Ciega Bay, experiencing all the amazing things about Tampa Bay. So again, that's September 16th. It'll be a morning paddle. The other event that's happening that week is Brews and the Bay. So this is just kind of like a happy hour event. This is taking place on September 20th at Three Kings Brewing in Manatee County. So we're hoping it'll be a game night. So come out and test your estuarine game trivia skills. And then additional events might be happening that week also. And then the last event that I want to bring up to you guys, which I'm really excited about, is the Tampa Bay Debris Derby, which is happening on November 4th at E.G. Simmons Park. So this is a trash collection tournament, and we're partnering with Power Pole, Skinny Water Culture, and Tampa Bay Waterkeeper to bring this event to life. So really we're hoping to have about 250 people participate in this event, and there'll be opportunities to win some really great prizes. Power Pole's donating a power pole, and Costa has donated sunglass package, and so we're hoping to get other private companies involved too. So yeah, if anybody has any questions.
That sounds awesome.
Thanks, I'm really excited.
Registration is open, so
Yeah.
tell your friends and folks.
And if you could share that links or to those different events with us, if you could email that out to the board and we can share that with our contacts, that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
I'll put that in the action item update that we send out after the board meetings.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments?
We have more.
No, I just on Sheila's.
We got a lot for you guys today.
Jessica, you want to highlight the Bay Mini Grants?
Sure. So the Bay Mini Grant application period is open now. As a reminder, a little bit about the Mini Grant program. It is a program that we fund individual projects up to $5,000 each. That is funded by sales of the Tarpon Tag, the Tampa Bay Estuary Specialty License Plate. So if you don't have one, get one. But the application period is open now. We have a webinar on Wednesday that anyone can register and attend to learn more about the program, to ask specific questions about their project or about the program as a whole, how to apply. We hope that it will be helpful for people to submit strong applications to the Bay Mini Grant. The application period closes on September 15th. So if you can include this information in a newsletter that you might send out, that would be great. Or post on your individual social media or your city or county or your entity's social media, that would be great too. And I'm sure we'll include that in the action memo as well. I think that's all I have to tell you about. Oh, and it's for environmental education and restoration. I didn't mention the most important part. So, yep, that's it.
Question for you, Jessica. If that webinar on Wednesday, are you going to record it so people will be able to? Fantastic. All right.
Are there questions for Jessica? Jessica, Maya, you want to highlight the temperature we're
Sure. If y'all have been following the news, one of the hot topics this summer has been how warm the oceans are. So there's been lots of news stories covering what's been going on with corals and other things in South Florida. But we are also observing warming water trends in Tampa Bay. And so I think last year we discussed how warmer water temperatures may be an additional stressor that's contributing to seagrass decline in Old Tampa Bay. So this year we've continued the project that we started last year to deploy temperature sensors at six random locations every 2 weeks in Old Tampa Bay. And those data are coming in. There you can see the results in this open science tool that Marcus has helped to create. So just wanted to let you all know that we've been out there on the water recording the temperatures. And so if you're interested in sort of seeing some of those local trends, you can see that information here. We're going to be working on summarizing some of the temperature trends and the data the preliminary data that we get from these studies into a manuscript later this year, we're hoping. And just anecdotally, wanted to let y'all know that up until a couple of weeks ago, water clarity in Old Tampa Bay was looking really excellent. It was very clear, very beautiful conditions, so much less in the way of cell counts and observations of the harmful algae bloom pyridinium in that bay segment. So that's good news in terms of our annual water quality monitoring programs. However, in the past couple of weeks, we have started to detect bloom conditions at some of the locations in Old Tampa Bay. So, wanted to give you the optimism and the silver linings where we can, but also make sure that we're letting you know the real-time information as we get it. And I also just wanted to say a caveat: if you do go onto that dashboard and look at some of the temperatures that we're observing in Old Tampa Bay, you will note that there's one very high observation above 100 degrees, above 38 Celsius. So I just wanted to let you all know that that location is right there at the thermal outflow of the Whedon, at the Bartow plant at Whedon Island. So where they're generating energy, they have to take that water and discharge it. And so it creates this sort of anomalous condition in that bay segment. So that very high value, that's what that one is reflecting. So just so you contextualize it.
Is there any way to address that? That doesn't sound like a really good way to add to the.
This is a topic that we've discussed in some of our climate resiliency planning, climate ready estuaries planning. This topic is one that in the summertime it can exacerbate heat conditions, but in the wintertime these areas also serve as important habitats and thermal refuges for our manatee populations. And so while it's not natural, it is something that they are using and relying on during the colder months. And so there are balances, give and take. So it's just something to think about. And obviously we need to generate power to sustain the region and our economy and our way of life. So I'm sure there are things that we can do, but there is a footprint to generating power, and this is one of those things.
They generally have to address to a certain extent those thermal impacts through the permitting process, but we also know that those entities are investing in renewable energies, and the more we mix our energy sources to things that don't require burning of fossil fuels, that would have a benefit in terms of that thermal pollution.
Two sides to the coin, for sure.
Blake can give an update on the economic valuation study that I mentioned before.
Yeah, so hopefully all of you have seen the report on your desk. It's the 2023 economic valuation of Tampa Bay. This is one of the projects funded by our Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund that was led by Alana Todd here at the Regional Planning Council. And so what this study looks at is it looks at the different benefits that the Bay provides. So it looks at economic contributions of the Bay to different sectors in our economy. It looks at amenity values that the Bay adds to property values. And it also looks at different types of ecosystem services like the benefits of carbon sequestration, denitrification, and flood protection. And so in addition to this physical report, we created this online dashboard available on our website that makes that presents the results in a more sort of user-friendly way, but also adds some level of kind of customization and interactivity to it. So you can browse through the results of the different analyses that they did, and like if you want to go to the economic impacts page, you can select the type of impact you want to look at. So do you want to look at the number of jobs that are employed because of the Bay to different sectors, or the amount of income that's generated by the Bay for different sectors? And if you're looking at direct contributions, indirect, induced, that sorts of things. So you have some kind of customization that you can do to it. And same thing with the other pages as well. Ecosystem services, you can look at per hectare valuation benefits or total across the watershed, and flood protection benefits. You can also look at benefits from different types of habitats, as well as different counties and how their flood protection benefits differ between them. Also importantly, we have in our methods section, you can of course see a summary of each of those analyses, but there's also a data download option available. So all of the information that was used to create these results are publicly available to anybody who might want them, as well as a electronic version of the report that folks can download. So we're hoping that this increases the accessibility of this report for people, and also increases the sort of transparency and reproducibility or usability of this data for other people that might want to utilize it in their work. Any questions?
Fantastic. I love this stuff. I love all that dashboard stuff. I would just ask you one thing. So this one feels thinner.
Yes.
So if we're going to pick up extra copies in the back, this is everyday people. This has more. I mean, I was just flipping through it.
The main difference between the long version and the short version is that the long version has an appendix that has all of the equations, it has R code, and so it just gets into the nitty-gritty details of it. So for some stakeholders, they may really like that, but probably for a more general audience, the shorter one. Yeah.
Thank you. And we can take some. You got
Yes, feel free. We have extras of both the shortened version and the longer version. And if you want more than what might be available, we have more at the office that we can provide. So please share with your colleagues as well these results. We'll be working with the Regional Planning Council to get the message out about this report and its availability too.
Do you do a presentation or share the report with like the Suncoast Sierra Club?
We haven't yet, but we would be happy to do so.
At an invitation, you'd come and speak, or
Yeah, I'd probably delegate to Blake or other staff who've been involved with the project.
It's also important to look at the map and what area it covers and what doesn't when you start looking at some of the stats and number of tourism related employees, because it does not have Clearwater Beach, so some of those numbers are different than like what we produce.
Thank you.
One more staff update, another publication that Marcus Beck would like to highlight.
Yeah, about every 5 years, the SRA program organizes the Bay Area Scientific Information Symposium, or BASIS. This is a regional conference of researchers, management, other technical staff to sort of gather in a shared space to talk about the state of the science that's so important to managing Tampa Bay. The first one was in 1982, so it's been for several decades now. The seventh and most recent one was in 2022, spring 2022, last year. So it was a success. It's a very good conference to attend. But as part of that effort, we tried to publish proceedings of BASIS, which is basically a publication of all of the talks that occurred there. So the talks are in person, but we also requested every speaker prepare a short paper that goes into more detail describing their research. So we've been working on the proceedings for the last year and a half. Myself, as well as 6 other guest editors, have worked to gather all of the papers from the presenters and put them through this peer review process, which hasn't actually been done in the past for previous proceedings, but we thought it was really important to actually have the papers go through this rigorous scientific peer review process so that it's sort of vetted through the broader scientific community to sort of improve how we instill confidence in the science that comes out of it. So we went through that process and actually published it as a special issue in the journal For the Scientist. We have print copies of that available. There's some on the table. There's going to be a digital copy available very soon, but this was actually delivered to our office this week. I'm really happy. It's all 400 pages plus of it right
A
there.
little thicker than the economic valuation study.
Oh, that's what it is?
Yeah.
Is it like
There's
2.5?
Ed, there's less pictures in this one.
It's full. Yeah.
You know, not to discount the value of this, but when I was a postdoc, before I even worked for the estuary program, I was trying to find old proceedings papers from previous BASIS conferences, and it's a really valuable asset to our region and for the scientific community. And so I'm really proud to be a part of this and just sort of have my touch on this most recent proceeding. So it's out there. I'm really proud of it, and I'm just sort of commend the efforts of not just the guest editors, but all of the scientists that contributed to that. So there's some copies over there. We have 250 of them available. So if you want one in print, let me know. The digital version will be available soon.
They'll make great Christmas presents.
Well, congratulations for raising the bar on having peer review. All that time, like, it's like grading papers. Like, how long are those submissions that you go through?
It's more like wrangling reviewers and making sure that they give you the review and then making sure the authors respond to the comments.
Yeah.
It's a group effort and just requires a lot of prodding of people to
Yeah.
make sure.
They're not getting paid or a grade or anything like that. It's just be a good team player.
But it's sort of the hallmark of what makes the peer review literature so important.
Only other thing I want to mention and give some space to, as we've talked about in prior board meetings, the program has been undergoing a program evaluation through EPA. We do this every 5 years just as a check to EPA that we're performing well to implement our CCMP. We turned in our package to EPA earlier this year and around the April timeframe, and had some site visits, including Tom McGill, our policy board representative from EPA Region 4. And they're going to be providing a letter back to the program indicating whether or not there are certain deficiencies or improvements that we need to make, or how we're just progressing as a program in general. So I want to give space to Tom if you wanted to comment on that.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Ed. And good morning, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I work out of EPA Southeast Region, EPA Region 4 out of Atlanta. And the program evaluation that Ed talked about is something that EPA conducts every 5 years for all the national estuary programs across the country. The Tampa Bay Estuary Program is one of 28 NEPs. And the purpose is really to evaluate how well is the estuary program accomplishing the goals of comprehensive conservation management program. And through this process, it's kind of like it's either actually I have to remind myself of the two categories. The ultimate evaluation is either the estuary program is progressing or they are proficient in meeting the goals. And through this process, although it's not complete, I saw a draft letter earlier last week. It was shared with Ed. Ed provided some comments, and in summary, relative to the other 27 national estuary programs that are all facing similar types of challenges, but Tampa Bay is viewed as a national leader. The strengths of the program that have been drafted. There are areas of improvement. Even the best performing estuary programs have areas of improvement. But Tampa Bay is extremely well run. I did have the opportunity to join other Region 4 staff, EPA headquarters, as well as the executive director for the Tillamook Estuary Program in Oregon that helps inform the review. We are all extremely impressed with the breadth and depth of knowledge, not only of the director, but all the staff. This is an extremely well-run program, despite significant challenges, including the obvious one of running an effective program during the pandemic. I'll hit on just a few highlights of what I anticipate the letter that we'll issue will probably be within the next few weeks, I believe, and just a few highlights. I'm looking at the draft letter right now. So there, 5 years ago, we had recommendations. Tampa Estuary Program did very well in addressing our recommendations from last time, including suggestions that we had about their website. It's an excellent website for someone like me who's always looking for information that's concise and easy to understand and packaged together. The strengths include, very obviously the Nitrogen Management Consortium. I mean, that in a lot of ways is looked at across the country as a very good model for managing nitrogen loads. And the attention they're paying to Old Tampa Bay, I don't think I've ever been to a meeting here where there hasn't been substantive discussion about the challenges there. That to me resonated as the biggest thing that EPA said is an area of improvement, but I don't think what we'll suggest in the letter will really change the direction or approach of Tampa Bay. We might have some comments around the edges, but the program is paying appropriate attention to it. The community engagement, the science. I mean, I think one of the best things about the program is bringing science to focusing on the science for all aspects of what they're approaching, the discharge from Piney Point and what Tampa Bay brought to that issue with respect to the coordination of monitoring was very impressive, and that'll be reflected in the letter. The interlocal agreement that's in place is an extremely effective mechanism to engage partnerships, and the funding that's gone into the program and the program's ability to leverage other funds is also very impressive and something that's highlighted as a model. Let's see. I'll pause there, but Ed, is there anything that I missed that from your review of the draft letter that?
No, I think, we shared the thoughts in terms of the challenges we're now facing in terms of the water quality issues and seagrass losses in upper Tampa Bay and just the work that's going to be needed moving forward to address some of our aging wastewater and stormwater systems and that encouragement and support from the EPA is going to be instrumental in terms of implementing actions that will have a real benefit for our challenges in the Upper Bay. So we appreciate all the comments and appreciate your kind sentiments about the effectiveness of the program. And I think it just relates to the staff we have now that we brought aboard, and they make us shine. So we appreciate that.
Questions or comments for Tom?
Just appreciate all the work that you do. You feel like we need to give you applause. So thank you all.
Tom, how long have you been our EPA representative?
About 10 years, maybe a little bit longer. And it has been a joy. These are very well-run, very efficient meetings. I feel like I've taken a lot of value from these meetings. The importance of consensus on the decisions that are made and the preparation to make those happen. So yeah, I've very much enjoyed coming down here. It's of these quarterly meetings, I typically make 2 or 3 per year. I'm thinking 2012 is when I started.
Very good. We appreciate it.
Where's Mr. McGill coming from? Where are you coming from?
Atlanta.
Oh.
So there's 10 EPA regional offices, and the Southeast region is out of Atlanta. So it includes Florida, the Carolinas, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee. I probably spend more than half my time on Florida issues. Some people call it not EPA Region 4, EPA Region Florida, just 'cause, for so many reasons. I spent a lot of time in Florida.
Very good. All right.
That concludes the director and staff reports.
All right. We'll move to discussion items. We'll move to agenda item 12, Executive Director Annual Performance Review. Traditionally, at this point, we invite the Executive Director and the majority of staff to take a coffee break. It's all public and all recorded and all video. It's more of a comfort level for some folks, so. Did everyone get the chart with the scores?
I only provided to you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can pull it all up.
Well, just to begin, kick it off, and I don't know how many of you have been through this with in this process before, but overall, it was a scale of 5. The total average score of all those that submitted was a 4.62. I think that reflects, everyone's faith and belief in Mr. Sherwood. Commissioner Mariano, let's see. Scores here. Oh, I see. Just an average score of 4.9, 5, 4.3, 4.4, 4.9, 4.3 among the individual respondents. There was nothing lower than a 3 on any of the categories. And I know Councilmember Beckman had some thoughts about the actual evaluation. I want to bifurcate that and have a separate discussion on that. But I'll just open it up to the floor. And I'll preface it with, baked into the budget is a 3% raise for Mr. Sherwood and up to 7% with his flexibility for the rest of staff. 3% on a higher salary is more than a 7% on a lower salary, so it all works out. That is what he has requested. That's what he's baked into the budget. But with that, I'll just throw it open to the floor and see what comments and questions you have, if any.
Well,
Councilmember.
Do you want the range? I mean, are we voting on a percentage or do we?
Typically, it's a review of the comments and the grading, and then it's a vote on the actual salary. There have been, over the years, there's been some years where he refused to take a pay increase.
Yeah.
There's been some years where we mandated he take a pay increase. This year, he said, again, baked into the budget is a 3% for him and up to 7% at his discretion on merit for his staff.
Well, I think, in light of, I'm certainly fully satisfied with, and pleased with Ed's work. And then with the summary of those scores, that's impressive. And then Mr. McGill's, summary is mighty impressive. So, yeah, 3 to 7% is absolutely.
I can tell you when it's been several years now, but when I traveled with Ed to an EPA conference in Washington, it was like carrying bags for a rock star. Folks from other estuary programs kept wanting to come up and talk to him and see what we were doing and what his thoughts were on different things. And so his predecessor established a bar of excellence, and Ed has met that and exceeded that. So I have absolutely no qualms about his leadership.
I totally concur as well. Again, as a new board member, my experience is somewhat limited, but so far it's been phenomenal. And there's a high dedication to mission in this organization, which is wonderful as well. So I think these folks deserve every suggested raise they're proposing.
It's a 7, which is a little higher than most of the municipal and counties in the region, but it's a smaller staff, so you're able to do a little bit larger percentage on a smaller staff. I can tell you at the county, we're doing a 4 with a couple of $600 bonus type things, but we also have 3,000 employees, so it's a little different. Anyone else, or is there a motion? Yes, sir.
I'll just chime in. I've always been very, very impressed with Ed. His way of reading is kind of sucks you in because he's so thoughtful and he anticipates problems, and that's one of the marks of a good leader. another mark of a good leader is the way that he works with his staff. And I've always been very impressed in my one-on-one meetings with him. There's never a issue. If I have a request or a question, it's always handled in a very positive manner. I appreciate your comments, Chair, on going with Ed on a conference, because we don't get to see that sort of interaction with peers. But just knowing him, I could see why you would say something like that, because it's just very impressive in what he does. And, I was a little concerned when I had a one-on-one with him, and he talked about the 7% raise for the staff and the 3% raise for him. I don't want to lose him because we're undercompensating him, and I just know we have a lot of issues, like in the city of St. Petersburg, when it comes to attracting and retaining talent, and we have a lot of retirees going out, and I don't want to lose him because he gets better offered someplace else. So my thought, I would like to bump up to 3% of this.
I know the commissioner would echo exactly what you just said. He is always speaks highly and just is very impressed with the way Ed handles everything on every level. And he was encouraging him to take that raise and on the call that we had in preparation. So I know he wholeheartedly supports, and he was trying to encourage him to take that 3% or more. I mean, he was just very positive over the entire organization.
On behalf of Ed, I know that your positive feedback means a lot to him. And I think he has expressed with you all on your one-on-ones that he would be willing to accept up to a 3% increase should you vote in that manner, provide that guidance. I don't think you're at risk of losing Ed. To your point, he's very mission driven. He's not in this for the money. He is, knowing him as a negotiator, if he was in a position where money was the issue, he would bring that to the board and let you all take an opportunity to respond if that was something that was a concern. What he is concerned about is supporting the staff and making sure that we are able to retain them and offer competitive salaries. There's still a significant gap between where the staff is at and where he is at. And he is concerned about looking beyond just 1-year time horizons for being fiscally responsible with the program's resources and the budget. And anything above what he's proposed is basically going to be taking away from our ability from grant funding to our ability to do projects. And so these kinds, I know he values that, that generous feedback that you all are providing to him, and he appreciates hearing it. But the consequence for that is something that means he doesn't have as much flexibility to responsibly pursue projects and support and retain the staff that he has. And so having that long-term view of not having a payroll that's excessive year over year is something that he considers very seriously. And so he's asked me to convey that to you all in these conversations, but obviously it's your prerogative on how you choose to proceed.
And I don't have the actual dollar amounts here, but we did, when we first hired Ed, we did do a comparison with other estuary programs in the state and the region. And it was a bump from his predecessor to get him into that good, and I apologize, I don't have that number at the top of my head, but I would say that we do the 3% as he's recommended, and then perhaps for next year, we do at least a brief salary comparison with the other estuaries and comparable organizations, salary benefits, et cetera, to where the next year we could make sure. And you're right. I think if there was serious an opportunity, Ed would come to us and say, and we could make those adjustments if we needed to. But to Maya's point, I don't, like Jimmy said, it's not. He's here because he believes in this organization. He's committed to it.
We did participate in a salary benchmark survey with the other national estuary programs throughout the region. And so that's one of the things that's Ed articulated in his goals, was to look at our staffing and capacity plan and make sure that our staff is at least at that 50% benchmark for each of the comparator positions. And so there's executive director level compensation information there too. I don't think we're far off at all in terms of where we're at, but we are committed to taking a look at that this year.
Okay. Further thoughts, discussion? All right. Let's bring them back in.
Like we moved.
Oh, were we going to discuss though the
let's
evaluation wording?
Yeah.
Do you want to do that? I mean, we could bring it back in.
Yeah, I think that one we could
Because
get.
that's probably better.
Yeah.
We need that motion before they come back in, or is that okay?
Oh, yeah, let's go ahead and vote. Was there a motion on the acceptance of the evaluation and the 3%, 7%?
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Show passes unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, just to open it up, and then the board can certainly make comments. Again, outstanding evaluations across the board on competency, on leadership, on ethics, on teamwork building, everything that we value as part of this organization. Across the board, overall 4.62 out of 5. So we're just really incredibly proud to be part of this organization. We're incredibly proud of you and your leadership of the organization, and really pleased with everything you're doing. The board voted to accept your recommendations of a 3% raise for you and up to 7% merit-based for the rest of your staff. And I do want to, maybe this will be on our evaluation, but I'm part of I think a lot of us are on boards in a lot of different organizations, but I don't think there's any other executive director of any organization I'm involved with that looks out for and protects and defends his staff more than Ed does. So I just want to use all the staffers to hear that from me, because Ed, it is not the same in every organization. So I appreciate that and how much you take care of your employees. With that, board members, any comments or? Wow, all right, very good. Again, thank you for another great year, and look forward to continuation.
I was extremely humbled by comments from the policy board and just working in the region. I think the special sauce for our region has always been collaboration and being able about very sometimes often contentious items. So I think it just shows that the work of the program is reflective of our partners, and it's reflective of the strong staff that we're building. So I'm looking to ensure that the work that we do is continued through those efforts of building that staff and making sure that we leave this place in better shape than we found it. So that's our goal for the program, and I know everyone shares that in this room. So thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, moving right along. Item number 13, regional artificial turf recommendations.
Yeah, just to give an intro on this topic.
Can we just, Charlie, I was just going to.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
It's okay.
I skipped right over it.
It's just.
We had talked, Councilman Member Beckman had raised some questions about the actual evaluation, and I wanted to give you the floor to talk about some of those, and then see where we go from there. So you're recognized.
It was just, we do, this is my third year on the Tampa Bay Estuary Program Board, and I enjoy it thoroughly and enjoy working with Ed and learning more all the time. But I have just a few concerns about the evaluation form, and I'm glad, we have our attorney, Mr. Khan, here too, because, my interactions with you all and the staff is like 4 times a year or so, right? And so for me to judge some of the language on general success criteria was that Ed, sets realistic goals and schedules, assigns responsibilities logically, promotes initiative and innovation, and establishes effective feedback mechanisms to achieve planned results with his staff. Well, I bet he does, but do I have proof of it? If somebody sits me down and says, wow, why'd you give him a 5 on that? I'm like, I've never even seen the inside of your offices, And so I don't want to judge him on that. I think he does great. And so I think if we have a drop down, sentence or something, choice that says, my interactions with the director are limited and I can't comment on this descriptor, or evaluation does not apply to my role with Tampa Bay Estuary Program, or, something like that. Because to me, I have every confidence, but, if we have some director that we're not happy with and we're trying to, evaluate them and, we're making judgments, I got to be able to respond to that, so that one, I don't know how you all feel. And there was another one about leadership. So Ed articulates and fosters enthusiasm for a shared vision and for the program mission. I can kind of sense that here, but it was fosters competency development in subordinates and peers, encourages innovation and appropriate risk-taking, and creates a positive work environment that fosters teamwork, pursuit of excellence, and self-motivation in others. Well, I can kind of assume that from the products you produce, but again, have I observed it, on day-to-day? I haven't. So I don't, I don't want to be all nitpicky, and then how about this one, and appropriately assigns workload to staff members, fosters and encourages learning and professional development. Well, I can tell that because you want budget to send them on conferences. That's great. But,
Might get a low score on
Pardon?
workload. So.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're, I don't know. And staff members through coaching, mentoring, and other applicable management techniques. I have no idea how he manages the day-to-day. And so, I just suggested maybe cleaning that just a little bit, or having an option that, some things don't apply to my role on this evaluation. But what do you think, Mr. Khan?
Well, I certainly understand the point that you're making. And, I hear this on several boards that I work with in terms of the board member and the interaction or limited interaction that they might have with staff. There's two ways you can approach it. One is the drop down, or you can look at the categories and try to tailor the categories more for the interaction with the board's interaction with the executive director. Is the board being kept informed? How are questions the board raises addressed? So those types of questions could be added, or the drop down. But I'll be happy to work with staff over the next year and work with the executive director and the chairman on any revision they would like.
Other thoughts? And I take it for granted a little bit because I've been here for so long that I've seen the complete makeover of the staff from where I started and the different positions and how Ed has adjusted science or communication or where as he's, and how he has held certain staff accountable when they needed to be held accountable. So yeah, I think, and Maya, I think that, I don't know if we shared with you, the county continues, we updated our county attorney evaluation this year and changed that a little bit. And I can share that with you all. But yeah, it's always good. I'm happy to actually take a look and see how we can streamline and bring us something back for early next year to look at so that we're ready for the next August evaluation. With everyone's approval.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're here to evaluate Ed, because we interact with Ed, but, somebody's got to protect the staff, or I'm not going to make assumptions for the staff. What if you guys were suffering under awful? I mean, oh my goodness. But I know you're not. But can again.
I'm not sure about the others, but I know Maya would communicate that well.
Yeah. She would.
My loyalty is bi-directional.
So,
Chair, I concur with that observation, and I think probably the three of you should take it under advisement and study it, but I would encourage you also to reach out with some kind of survey of all the board members to see what's important to them and like what kind of questions Kathleen might have, or Ed might have, or anyone might have, that should be added to the.
Okay, absolutely, we can definitely do that. All right, consensus? All right, sounds good. We'll work on that. All right, now, artificial turf.
Yeah, Mr. Max Piles from Stetson University is going to give an update on some of the discussions centered around artificial turf model ordinances that are being contemplated throughout the region. And kind of give a highlight of where we're at in those discussions. You've been working with the Regional Planning Council, has developed several memos. We'll be giving a little bit overview presentation, but also have some points that came out of the management board discussion that I can follow up with. So take it away, Max.
Thank you very much. As you were saying, I'm a student at Stetson. I'm in the Public Interest Law Clinic for Democracy and the Environment, the Agency on Bay Management. Reached out to us to, as you said, talk a little bit about the environmental impacts of artificial turf and how local governments have tried to address it in some capacity. As you're probably aware, artificial turf is a surface of synthetic fibers that mimics natural grass. Historically, it's been used in sports fields, those kind of things. It's where most people think of it. But recently, it's started to be used more and more in residential areas, in people's homes. And for that reason, that's why Agency on Bay Management and the City of Tampa wanted to try to get this information out there. So just to give you an idea of what this presentation is, I'm a law student, I'm not a scientist at all like any of these people, so we needed to build a base knowledge, and ABM had started this before. They had Dr. Cruz, who's a turfgrass scientist at University of Florida, come in and give a presentation. So we looked at that presentation, and then we went off, we did our own scholarly research to look into the environmental impacts. And we also did legal research into local ordinances throughout Florida to see how they have tried to address these things. We also met with Dr. Cruz himself to talk about it, and we also met with the Tampa Bay Builders Association. They have some members that install artificial turf. So we met with them to talk a little bit about what they do and what their interests are in regulations. So to talk a little bit about the environmental impacts. First and foremost, one of the most important things we looked at was just water infiltration. Just seeing how the permeability of the water once it hits the artificial turf and ends up entering the groundwater. Most people kind of look at the top layers as the most important part to see where the water permeability is, but as the types of artificial turf and the knowledge of it has increased, these actually have started to look to be as permeable, if not more permeable, than natural turf. What the issue becomes is that natural subgrade at the very bottom, as you can see in that diagram, where during the installation process, it has to be heavily compacted to get a nice flat surface, and that becomes an almost impenetrable surface for water. So once the water comes through all of the layers, it hits that subgrade and it turns into runoff and runs off the side. And some studies have shown that artificial turf made in this way is significantly more runoff than natural surfaces. As well, there's also some heat ambient temperature issues with artificial turf. You've probably heard of the urban heat island effect. I'm sure you're all well aware of what it is and how it works, but as you can imagine, artificial turf is made almost completely of artificial materials, which hold on to heat a lot more than natural surfaces. And this can be released over time, overnight, and have a number of different impacts. So one study we looked at saw that artificial turf can rise as much as 86 degrees Fahrenheit higher than natural surfaces on a hot, sunny day, or even 8 degrees hotter than asphalt. Likewise, as you can imagine, anytime you're replacing a natural surface with an artificial one, there's going to be some loss of natural grass ecosystems. These aren't the best ecosystems to begin with, so the loss isn't as bad as, tearing down a forest, but it's still there, it's still something. You're getting rid of good insect populations, and despite what some people think, they do still have weed growths on top of the surface, which can be a negative side effect as well. Another issue we saw is the microorganisms that live on the surface. On a natural turf surface, there's microorganisms which break down waste and everything that becomes a part of the ecosystem. But on an artificial turf, it doesn't have these microorganisms breaking down these waste products, so then they end up, instead of breaking down, they get washed away with the rainwater runoff, and they can enter into stormwater or something like that as well. Lastly, for environmental issues, pollution is one of the major issues we saw with artificial turf. It's made with tons of different artificial materials, including PFAS and volatile organic chemicals. We saw a study from Scandinavia that found hundreds of tons of microplastics being leached in the rainwater into water bodies. And this has been cited as one of the one of the most important reasons why certain countries in Scandinavia and cities throughout the United States, including Boston and a few cities in California, where they have decided to completely ban use of artificial turf simply because of the leaching of microplastics. And then artificial turf also does have a required lifespan. It only lasts about 8 to 10 years before it's broken down enough that most people want to see it being replaced. And as of right now, there isn't really much to do with it once they try to get rid of it. There is recyclable options, but these are mostly new, they're not widespread, and they're not readily accessible, so most of the time the leftover turf will end up in a landfill or something like that. So just to talk a little bit about the existing regulations we saw throughout Florida. Because we did this for the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, we took a look at the Tampa Bay area specifically, but we also found and looked at municipalities like Orlando and a number of smaller ones throughout South Florida. And we only really looked at codified ordinances when we did this. So some of the less codified regulations, such as stormwater guidelines, we did not include in what we looked at. So as far as the Tampa Bay area goes, Hernando County simply says artificial turf is not a live plant installation. Multiple municipalities, including Pinellas, Newport Richey, and St. Pete Beach, say that it meets the general maintenance requirements, which is just saying, oh, your yard looks good, you don't have to make any changes. St. Pete Beach says that it is a non-vegetative pervious material, but it limits it to only 20% of the minimum required pervious area. And I'll come back in a little bit to talk a little bit about the pervious area with other municipalities. And as I said before, there's some indirect regulations like stormwater guidelines or the minimum required for vegetative material and permeability that can have an impact on the artificial turf in an area without directly calling it out. So for the other municipalities we looked at, the most common standards we saw were permitting, design standards, installation standards, how much turf can be put into a single property, and some other random standards. So as far as permitting goes, almost every single municipality we looked at required permitting in some capacity. They required information to be sent into the city, including landscaping plans, the irrigation plans, what kind of turf is being put in, what it looks like, what materials are being used, just anything to get information to the city before installation of turf on property. Likewise, there's design standards. These are mostly aesthetic, saying, what grass blades can be used, what are they going to look like, what materials are allowed to be used, but also infill use. So infill is the material that is mixed in with the grass blades to give it ballast, to keep it standing up straight and looking good. You've probably heard of the crumb rubber infill, which is a little black plastic granules that are very common. Fortunately, these are not as common in residential uses, mostly because they're more useful for sports capacity. But the crumb rubber infill is where a lot of that pollution is coming from. So certain municipalities have taken the step to just ban it completely and use silica sand instead. And when we talked to Tampa Bay Builders Association, they did not really have a problem with this because silica sand is one of the most common uses for residential areas anyway. Some of the other standards just try to make it as permeable as possible, make it weigh enough so wind isn't lifting it up off the lawn, make it lead-free, flame retardant, no indoor-outdoor carpeting. We're not making mini golf courses in people's backyards, that kind of thing. And then installation standards, we're mostly saying if you're going to install it, it needs to be done the right way, have it done by a licensed contractor, leave it up to the manufacturer's specifications, what materials can be used, the compacted aggregate, that's 3/4 of the way down in the diagram, as you can see, that needs to have a positive drainage, as well. Certain municipalities have said the subgrade, that's the most problematic section we talked about before, that needs to have positive drainage. I believe in the meeting last week when we talked about this, that's something the city of Tampa, I believe, mentioned that they are trying to ensure there is positive drainage in that subgrade. And then as well, making sure the seams and the infill are being done correctly, try to prevent the turf from interfering with plants on the property, other structures, neighboring lot lines, protect roots of trees during installation, those kinds of things. Next, for the allowable square footage, just how much can be put onto a piece of property. The most common way we saw municipalities address this was by inserting artificial turf in the impervious surface ratio. I'm sure you're all aware of what that is, but it is basically how much of a piece of property is allowed to be impervious to water infiltration. And we found this to be the most common, likely because it's the simplest way to insert artificial turf and limit how much can be on a piece of property. And the impervious surface ratio is an extremely common, well-used standard. So being able to slot in artificial turf into that, it just makes sense. Another way that limits the amount of turf on a piece of property is requirements to maintain distance from certain aspects of the property. So Orlando, for example, says you can't have artificial turf within 50 feet of a body of water or within 6 feet of the drip line of a tree. This is obviously more indirect than something like the impervious surface ratio, but it will limit the amount of turf on a piece of property. And as far as a hard limit goes, Miami Shores is the only municipality we saw that set a hard limit. They set it at 30% of the area or 600 square feet. We believe this is the only municipality because it kind of seems arbitrary as compared to something like an impervious surface ratio where there's a reason for limiting it in that capacity. Finally, some of the more random standards we saw, this maintenance standards, make sure it's clean, looks good, prohibition in rights of way and prohibition in front yards, only using it in a rear yard, make sure any kind of damage to it caused by like a utilities is covered by the property owner and not the city, for example, and prohibitions on seawalls. And another aspect we wanted to point out, you've probably heard of the Florida Friendly Landscape, where they, in cities like St. Petersburg and Tampa, they kind of help influence what is considered a Florida-friendly yard for Florida-friendly plants and everything. And they do not consider artificial turf to be Florida-friendly, if that's shocking. And so finally, just some of our personal takeaways from what we saw with the environmental impacts and how municipalities had to address it. Hard limits we found not to be used very often, and when they were, we couldn't really tell why that limit was set that way. Like I said before, 30% or 600 feet of allowable square feet in Miami Shores. We can't figure out where that number came from or why, but it would be effective as the kind of path that a municipality chose. Permitting, again, every single municipality we looked at had a permitting standard. It gets the city the information before the installation occurs and just sets them up to know what's going on. Some of the other standards we saw to try to limit some of the potentially harmful environmental impacts. Just as I said, limit the total amount that is allowed on a piece of property. The kind of more random regulations about protecting natural landscape, 50 feet from water bodies, 6 feet from trees, those kinds of things. And then what materials can be used. As I said before, crumb rubber infill is one of the highest sources of microplastics and chemicals in artificial turf and isn't regularly used in residential impacts already. So making sure they use silicon sand instead is something that is well liked. Again, just general installation requirements. If you're going to be installing artificial turf, make sure it's done the right way. And some of these issues do run into some enforcement problems. It's hard to tell after the fact some of the things that are happening if turf gets input and then the city's coming in behind trying to see what was input where, when, how. Those can certainly be issues. That is all I have to say today. Thank you very much. And is there any questions or anything?
Thank you, Mr. Piles. Are there questions?
I'll just make a couple comments. Every time I see this presentation, it's improved. So I would say thank you because I learn more every time. I've seen it at Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council and it gets stronger every time I see it. So I learn that. Thank you. When I think about the 6-foot tree lines on the edges, how do they account when there's growth? Do they have to take the turf back on those tree lines, or how are they accounting when a tree canopy is growing and now it's going to impinge upon if there's a turf? Is there anything about that?
I think that is a great question that I do not have an answer to.
Okay.
So I apologize.
No, that's okay. I was just thinking out loud. And I think this is the first time I don't recall the PVAS being on the slides before. Is PVAS inherently part of turf, or is it just in certain types and certain manufacturers that use it?
So I'm not aware of all of everywhere it's used. I know when the grass blades themselves are being made, that often includes PFAS. The crumb rubber infill often includes PFAS. From my memory, I remember some of the materials, it's not the actual turf itself, but the manufacturing process, the mechanical pieces that create the actual blades, they also include PFAS, which can end up in the final product. That's all I have. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not an expert, but I imagine probably added for fire retardant to make sure that the turf doesn't.
It's scary to think about all the things that are coming forward with PVAS and then to know that they're in this material is not an upside for me.
Yes, ma'am.
So I appreciate you doing that research and I don't know if anybody else has to have it on the agenda, the discussion today. I know it's important to me. We've had a number of Clearwater residents who have put artificial turf installed it at great expense that's not compliant with our code, and now they're asking for some leeway. But and they've shared a bunch of studies and things like that. But one thing I don't, especially with PFAS and artificial chemicals near the water and all that, I don't know that it's a really good idea. But is there a side-by-side comparison of using chemicals on your lawn, mowing your lawn with fossil fuels, unless you've got an electric lawnmower or something like that? Is there, there are comparisons that way? I would think with artificial, it's breaking apart eventually and going right into our water versus, if you have a Florida-friendly natural landscape lawn, And the worst you're doing is mowing it, hopefully with an electric lawnmower, it's probably not as bad, but any commentary on that?
I don't have any empirical research to go towards something like that. I know in our conversations with Cruz and the Tampa Bay Builders Association, one of the things that the turf installers like to brag about is you don't have to water it, you don't have to use fertilizer, you don't have to do all these things. But as I said before, you can still have weeds growing, so people will still use herbicides, still use those kinds of chemicals on it. So like I said, I don't have empirical research, but some anecdotal discussions about that.
Depending on the application, you have to rinse it and clean it too. So if you think about places like some of the pet-friendly bars that use this kind of stuff, that it's getting washed on a daily basis in order to be sanitary. So it's not being watered to promote growth, but for cleanliness.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, great presentation. I'm very, very enlightened by that. Question I had too is it would be interesting, I don't know whether it's beyond the scope of your analysis, but if you could do kind of a carbon footprint analysis of artificial turf, seeing both on the side of what it costs to carbon stuff to manufacture and also what you lose in carbon sequestration from not having natural growth. Because I think you probably
That is something we found one study from Canada that did find it was.
Can you potentially share that?
Potentially, I can't remember if I have it saved or not. I'll try to find it.
Is it in the memo you prepared? Okay.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to see if I can find it, but it did come to the conclusion that natural dirt was more carbon safe.
Yes, sir.
I had similar questions that Councilmember Beckman brought up, kind of the comparison between artificial turf with no maintenance and then maintaining a lawn. We just think of, I've got a lawn service. Somebody they bring their truck in, then they mow, clean everything up. My lawn needs fertilizer every now and then, pest control, all that sort of stuff. Just think about that. And then the other kind of big picture is the ecosystem effects. And when you had that diagram that talked about how you have to compact the turf and you create a barrier. And when you start getting rid of insects and all that sort of stuff, you start thinking about like larger ecosystem issues, like what happens to the birds and the snakes and, all our ecosystems very fragile. And I'm just not sure what the long-term effects are going to be. I really liked your presentation though, because it opens up a line of thinking that I think as policy makers, we need to think through all the policy, all the different impacts. I kind of think back, and this might be a little bit of a stretch, but when Army Corps of Engineers, for flood control reasons, decided to change the Simi River Valley, and at the time they thought they were doing something good, but then you had these long-term effects that just weren't thought through at the time. And we've been dealing with consequences of something like that. So it's kind of where my mind goes with this. So thank you.
So is Tampa Bay Estuary, are you making a recommendation against?
There's a couple more comments. I could discuss the management board input. There was no formal recommendation from the management board.
No.
I don't know if it was outside of the scope of your study. Do you have any information on trends, whether like residential use of artificial turf is increasing level or decreasing? And was that anything you looked at?
Not really. We were doing this at Last of Us because the city of Tampa was seeing it more, is how I understood it. They were having more requests about whether or not they could do it. That's just what I heard. We didn't look into any trends.
Yes, sir.
One other question, and again, you're very thought-provoking here and getting this dialogue going with everyone. I know that you were somewhat limited in your scope by doing a Florida comparison of municipal governments and so forth. I personally think it would be great to expand that to a multi-state comparative analysis. I'm sure some states have probably, state legislatures have preempted local rule on this issue. I'd like to see that. I think it's good to look at best practices and or worst practices in different states for the Florida legislature to look at, you know, as well as county government and not just municipality, because having this disparate effect in a place like Pinellas County with all the places we have could have disastrous consequences for all of us. So I think this, if anything, begs the question for either state or federal preemption. This is it, because it has an impact on all of us in terms of stormwater runoff. So again, I don't know the limitations of your analysis, but I think it would be, if funding or a grant were there, it would be great to have an expanded study on what you've done here in a very unique and positive way.
I mean, like I was saying before, and as you said, we did try to limit this to just Florida cities and counties. But just ambiently, as we did the research, we found regulations in California, New England, even overseas. The European Commission has an upcoming ban on microplastics that includes some of those used in artificial turf. So even though we weren't focusing on it, we definitely got a taste of what's going on elsewhere as well.
Well, that again, if you can, if there's a vehicle to get the funding, that would be instructive to all of us here and expanded to counties and state governments and our state government.
As a reminder, there's a number of individuals that are present in the virtual meeting room. I have asked them in the chat to identify themselves if they have a question. I don't see any hands raised or no one has indicated that they want to speak now, but this is a verbal invitation if anyone online would like to ask a question or comment on this topic.
As we're getting that cue, Sheila, would you mind shifting the presentation on the front to the one that's going through the GoToMeeting? So I'm sharing some slides of the management board discussions just to kind of round up what was discussed last week. So, you know, in general, the management board felt that it would be desirable to come to sort of the regional consensus on design standards or some sort of basis of review around artificial turf. We definitely thought that, you know, involving the appropriate stakeholders in those discussions, including the building community, Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, because they've been funding some of this work, as well as the Florida Stormwater Association and the Florida landscaping researchers at the University of Florida IFAS need to be part of those discussions. And ultimately, you know, the regional consistency centered a lot around what Max was talking about, that impervious surface ratio estimates and how that's defined throughout the region. City of Tampa is drafting an ordinance right now that takes certain percentages into consideration. But that's a real critical component because that impacts the calculation for stormwater fees on residential properties. So regional consistency in that respect would probably be desirable so that the building community understands sort of what those thresholds might be as they develop different parcels. There was also talk, as Max mentioned, about specific products, that some products are better than others out there in the application of artificial turf. And Max emphasized that, you know, there's a certain service life to these installations, and there's no standards or sort of recommendation for compliance in terms of residential applications on how often these need to be maintained and or replaced in the future. So again, regional consistency around those points would be appreciated, I think, by partners. And you know, I think the biggest question goes to how the site prep actually occurs when these installations are approved. That subgrade compaction question is a big one. And certainly that goes into the calculation of those impervious thresholds that was mentioned that are important to consider in design standards. Also aggregate type and, you know, just general prep or application was of concern of the management board. I did want to point out that Max did develop a research memo of outstanding research around these topics, and we heard some of the input today from the policy board. If it's a desire, I think those sorts of research questions, the SRA program is more than poised to kind of tackle. We don't have immediate resources to do that work, but we would have to program that into subsequent work plan years. But that is something we're happy to consider if these are still some questions that are outstanding to make informed policy decisions about. So I'll stop there, and I know Colleen was also at the management board meeting. She could provide any other input I might have missed there too.
Everybody had a lot of good input. But I definitely think it's definitely a topic we have to continually question how this, what's allowed and the impacts. It's just kind of scary, honestly. I don't know.
Yes, sir.
I just want to agree with Jim on, I just can't see within Pinellas County, each municipality coming up with their own set of rules and ordinances. It looks like this is a county or a state issue that needs to get involved.
Well, that part about the impervious is going to be the important part, because we have, 17 or 18 different surface water fee programs in Pinellas County. So how each one of those defines that would be one of the hurdles to getting a uniform code. I mean, just anecdotally, I haven't seen it, maybe one residential that I know of in the backyard, not the front, where they wanted to have an entertaining area. And I see it more in commercial spots. You mentioned the dog bar. I've seen it in some of the beach hotels where they want to have activity space that would have been cement or block or something, but they put that there just for the look of it. But hearing all of what you're talking about, as far as it sounds like more work than it's worth on a lot of these things. About you're still getting weeds.
I was just going to say, there are some good applications in the city of St. Petersburg, and I'm sure other municipalities. All of our playgrounds have artificial turf. It works very well, and we're changing out, because we used to have that dark rubber, which was terrible. That's like compounded. The artificial turf is just a good way to keep children safe and have a clean environment for them to play in. So I could see certain applications where it would be a good thing to have artificial turf versus just cement.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, but I mean, if that artificial turf is fire retardant and treated with PFAS and your kids are rolling around it and dogs are walking on it and stuff. I mean, I've got big concerns about that. City of Clearwater just put in our $84 million park artificial turf. It slants right down into, Clearwater Harbor. So, you've got to model what you have for the rest of the city.
Is there a way to encourage a different material use for them to study, to figure out ways to make their industry more environmentally friendly? I mean, how do you give them a carrot? How do you encourage them to do the right thing rather than using these chemicals and these little things they float in? I know the Race Field has them, or said those little, I forgot what you called them, but it just seems counterproductive to everything we're doing with water quality in every way. I mean, I get the need to a certain degree. I know that, soccer fields are in heavy use, and it's easier to have that because then you don't have to rest the fields for the kids. But there are some environmental, clearly, implications in that.
All right. Next steps about, is it the thought that it would be our program that would be the convener of some of these stakeholders, or are we looking for another group, the Regional Planning Council, or what's the thought process of convening a stakeholder group to have some of these further discussions?
think that's what we're bringing it to the board's attention. So, the Regional Planning Council has been working on this. If there's a desire to go towards certain aspects, especially the research, I think the SRA program is probably the more applicable to do that, and we can program that in future work plans. If it's policy and code development, I would look towards the Regional Planning Council to help lead that, and we can have those conversations with them.
Collaborate. And
So put it into a future budget if for possible scientific research, but not.
Yeah, and the soonest would be our fiscal year 2025 work plan. And I've promised several things for that work plan at this meeting so far.
I've got it.
But yeah, in developing that, and that would come to the board, the February board meeting next year.
But it sounds like that research should be tailored towards answering these questions as sort of trade-offs between between native landscaping or Florida-friendly landscaping, like living turf or artificial turf, and like a comparison across those on the sort of like matrix of concerns that you all have identified.
Carbon footprint.
Carbon, chemicals, pesticides, fertilizer, water use, heat, all those things.
Ecosystem effects.
And at that point too, I would encourage staff to look into additional grant opportunities, potentially from DEP or
Yeah, to fund that.
state or federal to do this, yeah.
Absolutely.
We don't want to take away from everything
No.
we're doing. Be great GPA, no grant opportunity.
Is there anything coming out of ORD that would be maybe applicable to Iowa work?
I will admit, until I saw this presentation, I did not give artificial turf a lot of thought. EPA has a trash-free waters program, and so I am curious to know how might there have been some work, and EPA has a Gulf of Mexico division. Some of y'all may be aware they have a lot of discretionary funds that give out grants. So I'm going to go back to my office and look into this, but I'm not aware of it.
The image of the artificial turf completely on fire is the image I've walked away with this. So, thank you, Max. Anything else?
I don't see any comments from the virtual participants in the room.
All right, very good. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Max.
Last on our discussion item list, project highlight, CCMP interim update. And we have Dr. Schaefer.
Thank you. Sharing my screen. All right, you should be able to see that. All right, well, thank you for this opportunity to present our project report on the CCMP 5-year update. Of course, the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan is the strategic plan for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. It guides the work that the program does and, importantly, facilitates the coordination of the work of the partners under some common goals. The CCMP is a document required under the EPA, and it is revised every 10 years and updated every 5 years. So this is the 5-year interim update and represents the tune-up, if you will. Okay. So this is our task list. We got to work in January of this year. And as an interim update, we're not changing the document around substantively. Rather, we're incorporating recent approved strategies and updating the document with recent project accomplishments. So you see the report covers for some of the recently approved strategies, including the 2020 Habitat Master Plan, the new Nitrogen Management Consortium Progress Report, the Communications Plan, the Strategic Plan, as well as some of the important regional collaborations like the Regional Resiliency Action Plan. We have a couple of other tasks where we are developing some new recommendations. Bullet item 2 there indicates that we're developing and incorporating recommendations for resilience activities I'll say a bit more about this in a moment. We're also developing and incorporating recommendations for equitable engagement activities. Again, I'll say a little bit more about this in a moment. Number 4, we're converting and publishing the CCMP as a website. Currently, you may know that CCMP lives as a flip book, PDF flip book on the internet, and we'd like to convert the content of the CCMP to an open science platform, much like the State of the Bay report. So it is interactive as a web page with content that can be more easily updated. We're also developing a CCMP tracking tool to help staff keep track of all of the goals, actions, and activities. And finally, we are doing sort of an auxiliary evaluation of the data and monitoring needs that might be needed for a potential Tampa Bay Estuary Program boundary expansion that would incorporate Clearwater Harbor, St. Joseph Sound, the coastal area, and up into the Alafai watershed. So you may recognize this as the table of contents for the current CCMP. And it's organized such that these first sections are really sort of the front matter of the report about the program itself. The items that are shown here are really the meat of the strategic plan, identifying the various action plans and the actions and activities that drive the program's work. And then along the right-hand side here are some of the implementing strategies that sort of govern how the work is done. So with regard to our interim update, we're going to be incorporating the recently approved strategies and updating recent project accomplishments in these areas circled in red. So they will be incorporated throughout the action plans and updating links and comment on the additional strategies that have been developed and approved since the last CCMP. Item 2 related to developing and incorporating resilience activities. Those will be incorporated in the climate change action chapter, as well as part 2 of the climate vulnerability assessment. Again, I'll say more about that in a moment. And the third task of updating the CCMP related to equitable engagement activities, those will find a home primarily in the Public Education and Involvement Action Plan, as well as the Public Access Action Plan. All right, so let me say a little bit more about some of the new recommendations for resilience activities. We are following EPA guidance for Tampa Bay Estuary Program being a climate-ready estuary. And in 2017, you may remember the program developed a climate risk vulnerability assessment. And this is related to the risk that climate changes might create for the program being able to implement its goals. And there were some 50 risks identified across all of the goals. And so our job this step of the way is to work on the action plan, evaluating all of those risks, deciding on a course. Should they be mitigated? Can they be accepted? Can those risks be transferred to another entity? Or should the goal itself be changed in order to avoid that risk if it's unavoidable? So we've taken the EPA's guidance in this workbook and turned it into a climate action decision support tool. Lots of colored boxes here, but essentially the yellow diamonds represent the decision that needs to be made according to the sort of criteria of the EPA guidance. And then we feed in all of the various risks that were identified in the 2017 assessment, 54 risks to the 15 goals of the program, and decide if those risks are high likelihood, high consequence, are those risks ranked high by staff, and do experts think that these risks can actually be mitigated? So that list of 54 risks of 15 goals was then, through that process, narrowed down to 14 risks. And then we went to our experts. We talked with the Climate Science Advisory panel of Tampa Bay. We talked with the Technical Advisory Committee. We talked with experts. We did 17 one-on-one interviews with Tampa Bay experts on climate change, ecosystem response, and collectively we came up with about 100 plus possible mitigating actions. We sent those through a screen to narrow those down, looking at technical feasibility, the relevance to CCMP goals, importantly, if they're a high priority for lead partners, and if we think progress can be made in the next 5 years. So those that survive that screening, if they're already in the CCMP, then they can be implemented. If they're not already in the CCMP, we can add them. So the implementation box lets us know what kind of information or updates we need to make with regard to monitoring, with regard to action. And then this last box, the evaluation box, presumably after 5 years or at the next CCMP revision, we can take a look at how those mitigation actions are performing with respect to the Tampa Bay Estuary Program goals, how those risks may be changing over time, and that allows us to circle back around, reevaluate the risk, or continue that action. So finally, we collect all of this information into a matrix that has specific recommendations shown here for how the CCMP activity should or could be updated to reflect the decision to mitigate, accept, avoid, or transfer, what action needs to be done, what are some project milestones so we can evaluate if that project's getting done, if it's reaching its milestones, if there's any complementary environmental monitoring that needs to be done to evaluate that risk, and who those lead partners might be. So this is just an example of 2 climate risks, what the decision might be, and recommendations for updating the CCMP. We'll do this throughout. The second set of recommendations that we're working on is for equitable engagement. And this builds off of the approved bipartisan infrastructure law equity strategy that Blake led the effort on. Very nice job on doing the background demographic research to identify the underserved communities in the Tampa Bay area. So we focused our efforts on finding out how we could better connect with these communities. We identified 20 community leaders in these communities, had some really great conversations, one-on-one interviews. Here's just a sampling of some of the folks who we talked to. And it was really enjoyable to not only work with staff in developing the interviews and the recommendations, but also reaching far out into the community and perhaps for the first time recently being able to have one-on-ones and find out what community concerns might be. We did semi-structured interviews where we asked them how they interacted with the Bay, what they saw as potential barriers, what they knew about the work of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program to try to find out where their interests overlap with the goals of the program. And we wanted to find out if they had heard of or were involved in the Bay Mini Grant Program, which is a great way to get all kinds of communities involved in the work of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. So our final recommendations for engaging underserved communities, increasing our stakeholder outreach to those areas is number 1, to reach out to new stakeholder groups. In the course of our brainstorming, we came up with more than 40 new organizations in the communities that have potentially overlapping interests with the work of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, including community centers, education and youth services, outdoor groups, health and wellness, media, and arts and culture groups. We also recognize that one of the barriers to connecting with communities who don't fully overlap with the work of the program is to sort of find that nexus. So we're recommending that the program actually join or co-host events in the underserved communities, sort of going and joining their community efforts, their community meetings, reframing issues to more directly meet their interests and needs, reframing issues that have an overlap with the environmental goals of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. So finding sort of the win-win issues. And then finally, overlapping better with the community media channels, including community radio, community newsletters, as well as social media. And then our final set of recommendations relate to targeting support directly to underserved communities for participation in the mini grant program. So looking through the goals of the CCMP and the recommended activities, finding the overlap between the interests of the communities and what Tampa Bay Estuary Program wants to get done, and then providing those communities grant writing and project support. We found that there are barriers to even submitting the grants, there are barriers to managing those projects, creating budgets, and having the funds available at the start, because these are reimbursement grants. So those are some of our recommendations for engaging underserved communities based upon our conversations directly with leaders of those communities. And again, we gather all this information in a form that can be used to update the CCMP. Here's an example of some recommended updates to the public engagement chapter, PE Activity 1, where we have a recommendation to promote public involvement in bay restoration and protection. So here we're reaching out to all stakeholders and communities in the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, but also noting these particular strategies for reaching underserved communities. So to wrap it up, here's a recap of the tasks that we are working on. We launched this in January, and we are hoping to have a draft in late summer and then bring this back to you as a final draft at your meeting in November. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, good. That was so much work in a strategic plan. I just had, we're talking about this climate action decision support tool and all that. So there was one slide where you talked about 100 plus mitigating actions, and then you took a thorough deep dive in screening and those that survived the screening. Then there's a matrix to reflect the decision to mitigate or not and all that business. Where did you go from the 100 down? Did you scale it down to, what do we have, like 15 now, or?
Actually, between the mitigating actions and the research or monitoring that might be required if mitigation is not possible right now, or if it's not feasible right now, I think we're about at 45. So it's still no small amount of work to be climate ready, with an action plan that can improve resiliency for the program and for the resources.
I think some of the benefits is that many of the mitigating actions that were identified are some of the common sense best practices that you're already engaging in for other program priorities. So there's a lot of co-benefits to the work that's already going on, things that you could do to reduce, to improve water quality, also have an effect on some of these climate things as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that to say that we expect that most of the recommendations are in fact already in the CCMP in one form or another. So the program is already functioning as with awareness of climate ready actions.
Yes, sir.
So making the comment that, this is our paramount guidance document that both governs our internal funding and the actions and strategies we support through our work plan, but it also can support partner grants and other actions at the regional level to implement these different CCMP actions and strategies. So very much appreciate Dr. Schaefer's work on this update. It's one of our most important documents that we develop as a program, and I think it's going to be a good one that we bring back to you in November to take some final action on the interim update.
Very good. Further questions or comments? Dr. Schaefer, thank you very much for your time on this report and your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your attention and your questions. My pleasure.
Thank you, Jennifer.
All right. We're just down to item 15, additional packet information. Maya, anything beyond what's on the agenda?
The main thing is just to note that what the meeting dates that are included in the agenda are the proposed meeting dates for the 2024 calendar. And so I ask y'all to take a look at those and make sure that you don't have any conflicts with other commitments that you might have over the next year. And if there's an issue, to please let me know. Our next meeting is November 17th.
Very good. Anything else for the good of the order? I think this is the longest meeting we've had in a long, long time after Tom complimented our efficiency. But thank you very much. A lot of good stuff done today. We appreciate your involvement, and we are adjourned. Have a great weekend.